hot, it is icky, it is sticky, and it is summer. Oh, let me just scooch my butt over just a little bit. Get nice and cozy and comfy. Hi, hello, hi. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to my stream. We're doing a reading stream today. Today we are reading a brand new book. It's called The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster. It is one of my favorite. Let me get myself comfy. Let me get myself just settle a little bit more into the bed, into my chair. Sorry, I was getting everything ready together and ready, kind of frantically. So I'm a little frazzled. But yeah, today we are reading The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster. It's one of my favorite books from childhood. I love this story. I haven't read it in a very, very long time, so I am going through this journey once again with you guys. So it's gonna be a journey for all of us. I'm so excited. I got my full water bottle right next to me. Got this bad boy right here with me, so that way I can stay hydrated, so that I don't die. It's very hot today. Today is a very, very hot day. I have my tabletop air conditioner pointed right at me. You can probably hear it right now. I just turned it up because it's going to be a very wickedly hot day. There's a heat wave going through my area this week, so it's going to be very hot, very icky. Anyone who lives on the East Coast will know, of the States will know, it's very, very hot. It's very, very icky. And if it's really, really hot where you are, please make sure to stay super hydrated and nice and cool, and take it easy. You know, don't do anything too strenuous if you can help it, because this heat is awful and it's icky, and it can be really bad if you get really sick from the heat. Okay, so be careful. Make sure everyone stays hydrated and keeps cool and tries to take it easy. Okay, if you can help it, if you can manage, try to take it easy when you can, because heat stroke and heat sickness is not fun. It is awful, and it's terrible, and it's painful. It can be painful. I've had both heat stroke and heat sickness before. It's not fun. It is icky. It is horrible. You feel like you're dying, and it's just not a good time. So please make sure to keep yourselves hydrated and cool. Stay out of the direct sun if you can manage it when it's really, really hot peak hours. And yeah, just take good care of yourselves, okay? Promise me you take good care of yourselves. I don't want my sweet friends and floofles getting all hurt and sick and icky because of this heat. So please promise you'll take good care of yourselves, okay? Good. I am joined by little Violet today. I have my Violet slime friend today, and we're gonna be reading The Phantom Tollbooth. The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster. I am so excited. I've been wanting to read this story out loud for quite a while. I have a whole lineup of favorite stories that I will read. I wanted to read classics as well, but you know what? It's okay. We can read classics, but we also can read some of like nostalgic stories and stuff like that. Some of my favorites. Maybe some you haven't even heard of before. I know there's a lot of people probably haven't heard some of the books I've read, or probably just seen them but never got the chance to read them. I have a lot of stories. I have a lot of books. I have a lot of digital copies of books. So, you know, I am a collector of the books. I am a massive bookworm. So I hope you guys can really enjoy this. I really do. Okay. I'm gonna take a sip of water, get myself situated, because it's really hot, and I really kind of woke up a little late. I woke up late again. I was just enjoying the sleep. I was enjoying my sleep. Lemmy was keeping the room nice and cold. And it was nice. It was such an enjoyable sleep. I almost didn't want to wake up, but then I realized what time it was. I was like, oh no, I have to wake up, and I have to wake up and start streaming. I had to get my book. I had to get some snacks, something to drink, something to eat. Okay, I am hydrated and I'm ready to go. I'm excited. Okay. I actually have a digital copy. I have a digital copy of my book instead of like a physical book. So I'm just gonna pull that up right now. I'm gonna be reading it off my phone because I can't find my reading tablet. I think Creator took it to use it, so I'm gonna have to look for it later. But I can pull it up on my phone. So hold on 1 minute. Alrighty. Let's get past these introductions because it's just very long. Okay, awesome. Okay. The Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Juster, Chapter 1. Chapter 1. Milo. There was once a boy named Milo who didn't know what to do with himself. Not just sometimes, but always. When he was in school, he longed to be out. When he was out, he longed to be in. On the way, he thought about coming home, and coming home, he thought about going. Hi, Tara. Good morning. Yes, this slime is named Violet. I have a whole creator spawned a whole bunch of slimes, so I got a whole bunch of slime pets now. This one is named Violet. I have this one on my head. Yesterday, I think I had Peachy on my head. So I have a whole bunch of different colored ones that I've named. They're my pets now, so I have to take responsibility and take good care of them every day. But hi, Tara. Thank you for being here. We just started. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it, friend. Wherever he was, he wished he was somewhere else. And when he got there, he wondered why he'd bothered. Nothing really interested him, least of all the things that should have. It seems to me that almost everything is a waste of time, he remarked one day, as he walked dejectedly home from school. I can't see the point in learning to solve useless problems, or subtracting turnips from turnips, or knowing where Ethiopia is, or how to spell February. And since no one bothered to explain otherwise, he regarded the process of seeking knowledge as the greatest waste of time of all. As he and his unhappy thoughts hurried along, for while he was never anxious to be where he was going, he liked to get there as quickly as possible. It seemed a great wonder that the world, which was so large, could sometimes feel so small and empty. And worst of all, he continued sadly, there's nothing for me to do, nowhere I'd care to go, and hardly anything worth seeing. He punctuated this last thought with such a deep sigh that a house sparrow singing nearby stopped and rushed home to be with his family. Without stopping or looking, Milo dashed past the buildings and busy shops that lined the streets, in a few minutes reached home, dashed through the lobby, hopped onto the elevator, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and off again, opening the apartment door and rushed into his room, flopped dejectedly into a chair and grumbled softly, "Another long afternoon." He looked glumly at all the things he owned, the books that were too much trouble to read, the tools he never learned to use, the small electric automobile he hadn't driven in months, or was it years? And the hundreds of other games and toys and bats and balls and bits and pieces scattered around him. And then, to one side of the room, just next to the phonograph, he noticed something he had certainly never seen before. Who could possibly have left such an enormous package and such a strange one? For, while it was not quite square, it was definitely not round, and for its size it was larger than almost any other big package of smaller dimension that he'd ever seen. Attached to one side was a bright blue envelope which said simply, "For Milo, who has plenty of time." Of course, if you've ever gotten a surprise package, you can imagine how puzzled and excited Milo was. And if you never had gotten one, pay close attention, because someday you might. "I don't think it's my birthday," he puzzled, "and Christmas must be months away. And I haven't been outstandingly good, or even good at all." He had to admit this even to himself. "Most probably I won't like it anyway, but since I don't know where it came from, I can't possibly send it back." He thought about it for quite a while, and then opened the envelope, but just to be polite. "One genuine turnpike toll booth," it stated, and then it went on. "Easily assembled at home, and for use by those who have never traveled in lands beyond." Beyond what? Thought Milo, as he continued to read. "This package contains the following items. 1. Genuine turnpike toll booth to be erected according to directions. 3. Precautionary signs to be used in a precautionary fashion. Assorted coins for use in paying tolls. 1. Map, up to date and carefully drawn by master cartographers, depicted natural and man-made features. 1. Book of rules and traffic regulations, which may not be bent or broken." And in smaller letters at the bottom it concluded, "Results are not guaranteed, but if not perfectly satisfied, your wasted time will be refunded." Following the instructions, which told him to cut here, lift there, and fold back all around, he soon had the toll booth unpacked and set up on his stand. He fitted the windows in place and attached the roof, which extended out on both sides, and fastened on the coin box. It was very much like the toll booth he'd seen many times on family trips, except of course it was much smaller, and purple. What a strange present, he thought to himself. The least they could have done was to send a highway with it, for it's terribly impractical without one. But since, at the time, there was nothing else he wanted to play with, he set up the 3 signs. Slow down, approaching toll booth. Please have your fare ready. Have your destination in mind. And slowly unfolded the map. As the announcement stated, it was a beautiful map in many colors, showing principal roads, rivers and seas, towns and cities, mountains and valleys, intersections and detours, and sites of outstanding interest, both beautiful and historic. The only trouble was that Milo had never heard of any of the places it indicated, and even the names sounded most peculiar. I don't think there really is such a country, he concluded after studying carefully. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. He closed his eyes and poked a finger at the map. Dictionopolis, read Milo slowly, when he saw what his finger had chosen. Oh well, I might as well go there as anywhere. He walked across the room and dusted the car off carefully. Then, taking the map and rule book with him, he hopped in and, for lack of anything better to do, drove slowly up the toll booth. As he deposited his coin and rolled past, he remarked wistfully, I do hope this is an interesting game. Otherwise, the afternoon will be so terribly dull. Chapter 2. Beyond Expectations. Suddenly he found himself speeding along an unfamiliar country highway, and as he looked back over his shoulder, neither the toll booth nor his room, nor even the house, was anywhere in sight. What had started as make-believe was now very real. What a strange thing to have happened, he thought, just as you must be thinking right now. This game is much more serious than I thought, for here I am riding on a road I've never seen, going to a place I've never heard of, and all because of a toll booth which came from nowhere. I'm certainly glad that it's a nice day for a trip, he concluded hopefully, for, at the moment, this was the one thing he definitely knew. The sun sparkled, the sky was clear, and all the colors he saw seemed richer and brighter than he could ever remember. The flowers shone as if they'd been cleaned and polished, and the tall trees that lined the road shimmered in silvery green. Welcome to Expectations, said a carefully lettered sign on a small house at the side of the road. Information, predictions, and advice cheerfully offered. Park here and blow horn. With the first sound from the horn, a little man in a long coat came rushing out from the house, speaking as fast as he could and repeating everything several times. My, welcome, 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 welcome to the land of expectations, to the land of expectations, to the land of expectations. We don't get many travelers these days. We certainly don't get many travelers these days. No. What can I do for you? I'm the weatherman. Is this the right road for Dictionopolis? Asked Milo, a little bowled over by the effusive greeting. Well now, he began again. I don't know any wrong road to Dictionopolis, so if this road goes to Dictionopolis at all, it must be the right road. And if it doesn't, it must be the right road to somewhere else, because there are no wrong roads to anywhere. Do you think it will rain? I thought you were the weatherman, Milo said, very confused. Oh, no, said the little man. I'm the weatherman, not the weatherman. For after all, it's more important to know whether there will be a weather than what weather will be. And with that, he released a dozen balloons that sailed off into the sky. Must see which way the wind is blowing, he said, chuckling over his little joke, and watching them disappear in all directions. What kind of a place is Expectation? Inquired Milo, unable to see the humor and feeling very doubtful of the little man's sanity. Good question, he exclaimed. Expectations is the place you must always go to before you get to where you're going. Of course, some people never go beyond expectations, but my job is to hurry them along whether they like it or not. Now what else can I do? What else can I do for you? And before Milo could reply, he rushed into the house and reappeared a moment later with a new coat and an umbrella. I think I could find my own way, said Milo, not at all sure that he could. But since he didn't understand the little man at all, he decided that he might as well move on, at least until he met someone whose sentences didn't always sound as if they would make as much sense backwards as forwards. Splendid, 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 exclaimed the weatherman. Whether or not you find your own way, you're bound to find some way. If you happen to find my way, please return it, as it was lost years ago. I imagine by now it's quite rusty. Did you say it was going to rain? You did say it was going to rain, didn't you? And with that, he opened the umbrellas and looked up nervously. I'm glad you made your own decision. I do so hate to make up my mind about anything, whether it's good or bad, up or down, in or out, rain or shine. Expect everything, I always say, and the unexpected never happens. Now please drive carefully. Goodbye, 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 good... His last goodbye was drowned out by an enormous clap of thunder as Milo drove down the road in the bright sunshine he could see. As Milo drove down the road, in the bright sunshine he could see the weatherman standing in the middle of a fierce cloudburst that seemed to be raining only on him. I need a drink. I need a drink! Excuse me. Excuse me. The road dipped now into a broad green valley and stretched towards the horizon. The little car bounced along with very little effort, and Milo had hardly to touch the accelerator to go as fast as he wanted. He was glad to be on his way again. It's all very well to spend time in expectations, he thought, but talking to that strange man all day would most certainly get me nowhere. He's the most peculiar man I've ever met, continued Milo, unaware of how many peculiar people he would shortly encounter. As he drove along the peaceful highway, he soon fell into daydreaming and paid less and less attention to where he was going. In a short time, he wasn't paying any attention at all, and that is why at a fork in the road, where a sign pointed to the left, Milo went to the right, along a route which looked suspiciously like the wrong way. Things began to change as soon as he left the main highway. The sky became quiet and gray, and along with it, the whole countryside seemed to lose its color and assume the same monotonous tone. Everything was quiet, and even the air hung heavy. The birds sang only gray songs, and the road wound back and forth in an endless series of climbing curves. Mile after mile after mile after mile he drove. Gradually, the car went slower and slower, until it was hardly moving at all. It looks as though I'm getting nowhere, yawned Milo, becoming very drowsy and dull. I hope I haven't taken a wrong turn. Mile after mile after mile after mile, and everything became grayer and more monotonous. Finally, the car just stopped altogether, and as hard as he tried, it wouldn't budge another inch. I wonder where I am, said Milo in a very worried tone. You're in the doldrums, wailed a voice that sounded far away. He looked around quickly to see who had spoken. No one was there, and it was as quiet and still as one could imagine. Yes, the doldrums, yawned another voice, but he still saw no one. What are the doldrums? He cried loudly, and tried very hard to see who would answer this time. The doldrums, my young friend, are where nothing ever happens and nothing ever changes. This time the voice came from so close that Milo jumped with surprise, for sitting on his right shoulder so lightly he could hardly notice was a small creature exactly the color of his shirt. Allow me to introduce all of us, the creature went on. We are the Lethargarians, at your service. Milo looked around, and for the first time noticed dozens of them sitting on the car, standing in the road, and lying all over the streets and bushes. They were very difficult to see, because of whatever they happened to be sitting on or near was exactly the color they happened to be. Each one looked very much like the other, except for the color, of course, and some looked even more like each other than they did like themselves. I'm very pleased to meet you, said Milo, not sure whether or not he was actually pleased at all. I think I'm lost. Can you help me, please? Don't say think, said the one sitting on his shoe, for the one on his shoulder had fallen asleep. It's against the law, and he yawned and fell off to sleep too. No one's allowed to think in the doldrums, continued a third, beginning to doze off. And as each one spoke, he fell off to sleep and another picked up the conversation with hardly any interruption. Don't you have a rule book? It's local ordinance 175389J. Milo quickly pulled the rule book from his pocket, opened to the page, and read, Ordinance 175389-J. It shall be unlawful, illegal, and unethical to think of thinking, surmise, presume, reason, meditate, or speculate while in the doldrums. Anyone breaking this law shall be severely punished. That's a ridiculous law, said Milo, quite indignantly. Everybody thinks. We don't, shouted the Lethargarians all at once. And most of the time you don't, said a yellow one sitting in a daffodil. That's why you're here. You weren't thinking. And you weren't paying attention either. People who don't pay attention often get stuck in the doldrums. And with that, he toppled out of the flower and fell snoring into the grass. Milo couldn't help laughing at the little creature's strange behavior, even though he knew it might be rude. Stop that at once, ordered a plaid one clinging to his stocking. Laughing is against the law. Don't you have a rule book? It's local ordinance 574381-W. Opening the book again, Milo found Ordinance 574381-W. In the doldrums, laughing is frowned upon and smiling is permitted only on alternate Thursdays. Violators shall be dealt with most harshly. Well, if you can't laugh or think... Hold on. Bean! Beans! Pretty beans! I hear Beans meowing in the background. I don't know where she went, but she's meowing. Well, if you can't laugh or can't think, what can you do? Asked Milo. Anything as long as it's nothing, and everything as long as it isn't anything, explained another. There's lots to do. We have a very busy schedule. At 8 o'clock we get up, and then we spend, from 8 to 9, daydreaming. From 9 to 9:30, we take our early mid-morning nap. From 9:30 to 10:30, we dawdle and delay. From 10:30 to 11:30, we take our late early morning nap. From 11:30 to 12, we bide our time and then eat lunch. From 1 to 2, we linger and loiter. From 2 to 2:30, we take our early afternoon nap. From 2:30 to 3:30, we put off till tomorrow what we could have done today. From 3:30 to 4, we take our early late afternoon nap. From 4 to 5, we loaf and lounge until dinner. From 6 to 7, we dilly-dally. From 7 to 8, we take our early evening nap, and then for an hour before we go to bed at 9, we waste time. As you can see, that leaves almost no time for brooding, lagging, plodding, or procrastinating. And if we stopped to think or laugh, we'd never get nothing done. You mean you never get anything done? Corrected Milo. We don't want to get anything done, snapped another angrily. We want to get nothing done, and we can do that without your help. You see, continued another in a more conciliatory tone, it's really quite strenuous to do nothing all day. So once a week we take a holiday and go nowhere, which was just what we were going when you came along. Would you care to join us? I might as well, thought Milo. That's where I seem to be going anyway. Tell me, he yawned, for he was ready for a nap now himself. Does everyone here do nothing? Everyone but the terrible watchdog, said the two of them, shuddering in chorus. He's always sniffing around to see that nobody wastes time. A most unpleasant character. The watchdog, said Milo quizzically. The watchdog! Shouted another, fainting from fright, for racing down the road barking furiously and kicking up a great cloud of dust was the very dog of whom they had been speaking. Run! Wake up! Run! Here he comes! The watchdog! Great shouts filled the air as the Lethargarians scattered in all directions and soon disappeared entirely. "Rah!" exclaimed the watchdog as he dashed up to the car, loudly puffing and panting. Milo's eyes opened wide, for in front of him was a large dog with a perfectly normal head, 4 feet, and a tail, and the body of a loud ticking alarm clock. "What are you doing here?" growled the watchdog. "Just killing time," replied Milo apologetically. "You see, killing time!" roared the dog, so furiously that his alarm went off. "It's bad enough wasting time without killing it." And he shuddered at the thought. "What are you doing in the doldrums anyway? Don't you have anywhere to go?" I was on my way to Dictionopolis when I got stuck here," explained Milo. "Can you help me?" "Help you? You must help yourself," the dog replied, carefully winding himself with his hind leg. "I suppose you know why you got stuck." I guess I just wasn't thinking," said Milo. "Precisely!" shouted the dog as his alarm went off again. "Now you know what you must do." I'm afraid I don't," admitted Milo, feeling quite stupid. "Well," continued the watchdog impatiently, "since you got here by not thinking, it seems reasonable to expect that, in order to get out, you must start thinking." And with that he hopped into the car. "Do you mind if I get in? I love automobile rides." Milo began to think as hard as he could, which was very difficult since he wasn't used to it. He thought of birds that swim and fish that fly. He thought of yesterday's lunch and tomorrow's dinner. He thought of words that began with J and the numbers that end in 3. And then as he thought, the wheels began to turn. "We're moving! We're moving!" he shouted happily. "Keep thinking!" scolded the watchdog. The little car started to go faster and faster as Milo's brain whirled with activity, and down the road they went. In a few moments they were out of the doldrums and back on the main highway. All the colors had returned to their original brightness, and as they raced along the road, Milo continued to think of all sorts of things. Of the many detours and wrong turns that were so easy to take, of how fine it was to be moving along, and most of all, how much could be accomplished with just a little thought. And the dog, his nose in the wind, sat back, watchfully ticking. Chapter 3. Welcome to Dictionopolis. "You must excuse my gruff conduct," the watchdog said, after they'd been driving for some time. "But you see, it's traditional for watchdogs to be ferocious." Milo was so relieved at having escaped the doldrums that he assured the dog that he bore him no ill will, and in fact was very grateful for the assistance. "Splendid!" shouted the watchdog. "I'm very pleased. I'm sure we'll be great friends for the rest of the trip. You may call me Talk." "That's a strange name for a dog who goes tick, 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 tick all day," said Milo. "Why didn't they call you—" "Don't say it!" gasped the dog, and Milo could see a tear well up in his eye. "I did not mean to hurt your feelings," said Milo, not meaning to hurt his feelings. "It's all right," said the dog, getting hold of himself. "It's an old story, and a sad one, but I can tell it to you now. When my brother was born, first pup in the family, my parents were overjoyed and immediately named him Tick, in expectation of the sound they were sure he'd make. On first winding him, they discovered to their horror that instead of going tick, 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 he went tuck, 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 tuck. They rushed to the Hall of Records to change the name, but too late. It had already been officially inscribed, and nothing could be done. When I arrived, they were determined not to make the same mistake twice, since it seemed logical that all their children would make the same sound. They named me Talk. Of course, you know the rest. My brother is called Tick because he goes tuck, 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 tuck. And I am called Talk because I go tick, 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 tick. And both of us are forever burdened with the wrong names. My parents were so overwrought that they gave up having any more children and devote their lives to doing good work among the poor and hungry." "But how did you become a watchdog?" interjected Milo, hoping to change the subject, as Talk was sobbing quite loudly now. "That," he said, rubbing a paw in his eye, "is also traditional. My family have always been watchdogs, from father to son, almost since the time began. You see," he continued, beginning to feel better, "once there was no time at all, and people found it very inconvenient. They never knew whether they were eating lunch or dinner, and there were always missing trains. So time was invented to help them keep track of the day and get places where they should. When they began to count all the time that was available, what was 60 seconds in a minute, and 60 minutes in an hour, and 24 hours in a day, and 365 days in a year, it seems that there was much more than it could ever be used. If there's so much of it, it couldn't be very valuable, was the general opinion, and soon it fell into disrepute. People wasted it and even gave it away. Then we were given the job of seeing that no one wasted time again," he said, sitting up proudly. It's hard work, but a noble calling, for you see. And now he was standing on the seat, one foot on the windshield, shouting with his arms outstretched. It is our most valuable possession, more precious than diamonds. It marches on, and it tide wait for no man. And at the point in the speech, the car hit a bump in the road, and the watchdog collapsed in a heap on the front seat with his alarm again ringing ferociously. Are you all right? Shouted Milo. Oof, grunted the talk. Sorry to get carried away, but I think you get the point. As they drove along, Talk continued to explain the importance of time, quoting the old philosophers and poets and illustrating each point with gestures that brought him perilously close to tumbling headlong from the speeding automobile. Before long, they saw in the distance the towers and flags of Dictionopolis, sparkling in the sunshine, and in a few moments they reached the great wall and stood at the gateway to the city. Roared the gateman, clearing his throat and snapping smartly to attention. This is Dictionopolis, a happy kingdom, advantageously located in the foothills of confusion and caressed by gentle breezes from the sea of knowledge. Today, by royal proclamation, it's market day. Have you come to buy or sell? I beg your pardon, said Milo. Buy or sell, repeated the gateman impatiently. Which is it? You must have come here for a reason. Well, Milo began. Come now, if you don't have a reason, you must at least have an explanation or certainly an excuse, interrupted the gateman. Milo shook his head. Very serious, very serious, the gateman said, shaking his head also. You can't get in without a reason. He thought for a moment and then continued. Wait a minute. Maybe I have an old one you can use. He took a battered suitcase from the gatehouse and began to rummage busily. He thought busily through it, mumbling to himself. No. This won't do. No. Ah! This is fine, he cried triumphantly, holding up a small medallion on a chain. He dusted it off, and engraved on one side was the words, Why not? That's a good reason for almost anything. A bit used, perhaps, but still quite serviceable. And with that he placed it around Milo's neck, pushed back the heavy iron gate, bowed low, and motioned them into the city. I wonder what the market would be like, thought Milo, as they drove through the gate. But before there was time for an answer, they had driven into an immense square crowded with long lines of stalls heaped with merchandise and decorated in gay-colored bunting. Overhead, a large banner proclaimed, Welcome to the Word Market. And from across the square, 5 very thin, tall gentlemen, regally dressed in silks and satins, plumed hats, and buckled shoes, rushed up to the car, stopped short, mopping 5 brows, caught 5 breaths, unrolled 5 parchments, and began talking in turn. Greetings! Salutations! Welcome! Good afternoon! Hello! Milo nodded his head, and they went on reading from the scrolls. By order of Azaz of the Unabridged, King of Dictionopolis, Monarch of Letters, Emperors of Phrases, Sentences, Miscellaneous Figures of Speech, we offer you the hospitality of our kingdom, country, nation, state, commonwealth, realm, empire, palatinate, principality. Do all those words mean the same thing? Guessed Milo. Of course! Certainly. Precisely. Exactly! Yes, they replied in order. Well then, said Milo, not understanding why each one said the exact same thing in a slightly different way. Wouldn't it be simpler to just use one? It would certainly make more sense. Nonsense! Ridiculous! Fantastic! Absurd! Bosh! They chorused again, and continued. We're not interested in making sense. It's not our job, scolded the first. Besides, explained the second, one word is as good as another, so why not use them all? Then you don't have to choose which one is right, advised the third. Besides, sighed the fourth, if one is right, then 10 are 10 times as right. Obviously you don't know who we are, sneered the fifth. And as they presented themselves one by one, the Duke of Definition, the Minister of Meaning, the Earl of Essence, the Count of Connotation, the Undersecretary of Understanding. Milo acknowledged the introduction, and, as Talk growled softly, the minister explained. We are the king's advisors, or, in more formal terms, his cabinet. Cabinet, recited the Duke. 1. A small private room or closet, case with drawers, etc., for keeping valuables or displaying curiosities. 2. Council room for chief ministries of state. 3. A body of official advisors to chief executive of a nation. You see, continued the minister, bowing thankfully to the Duke, Dictionopolis is a place where all the words in the world come from. They are grown right here in our orchards. I didn't know that words grew on trees, said Milo timidly. Where do you think they grew? Shouted the Earl irritably. A small crowd began to gather to see the little boy who didn't know that letters grew on trees. I didn't know they grew at all, admitted Milo even more timidly. Several people shook their heads sadly. Well, money doesn't grow on trees, does it? Demanded the Count. I've heard not, said Milo. Then something must. Why not words? Exclaimed the Undersecretary triumphantly. The crowd cheered his display of logic and continued about his business. To continue, continued the minister impatiently, once a week, by royal proclamation, the world market is held here in the great square, and people come from everywhere to buy the words they need or to trade the words they'd have it used. Our job, said the Count, is to see that all the words sold are proper ones, for it wouldn't do to sell someone a word that has no meaning, or didn't exist at all. For instance, if you bought a word like "listless," where would you use it? It would be difficult, thought Milo, but there were so many words that were difficult, and he knew hardly any of them. But we never choose which ones to use, explained the Earl as they walked towards the market stalls. For as long as they mean what they mean to mean, we don't care if they make sense or nonsense. Innocence or magnificence, added the Count. Reticence or common sense, said the Undersecretary. That seems simple enough, said Milo, trying to be polite. Easy as falling off a log, cried the Earl, falling off a log with a loud thump. Must you be so clumsy? Shouted the Duke. All I said was, began the Earl, rubbing his head. We heard you, said the minister angrily. And you'll have to find an expression that's less dangerous. The Earl dusted himself off as the others snickered audibly. You see, cautioned the Count, you must pick your words very carefully and be sure to say just what you intend to say. And now we must leave to prepare preparations for the royal banquet. You'll be there, of course, said the minister. But before Milo had a chance to say anything, they were rushing off across the square as fast as they had come. Enjoy yourself in the market, shouted back the Undersecretary. Market, recited the Duke, an open space or covered building in which, and that was the last Milo heard as they disappeared into the crowd. I never knew words could be so confusing, Milo said to Talk as he bent down to scratch the dog's ears. Only when you use a lot to say a little, answered Talk. Milo thought this was quite the wisest thing he'd heard all day. Come, he shouted, let's see the market. It looks very exciting. I'm gonna take another sip of water. That was a lot to say. No, Chapter 4. Confusion in the Marketplace. Indeed it was, for as they approached, Milo could see crowds of people pushing and shouting their way among the stalls, buying and selling, trading and bargaining. Huge wooden-wheeled carts streamed into the market square from the orchards, and long caravans bound for the four corners of the kingdom made ready to leave. Sacks and boxes were piled high and waiting to be delivered to the ships that sailed the sea of knowledge, and off to one side a group of minstrels sang songs to the delight of those either too young or too old to engage in trade. But above all the noise and tumult of the crowd could be heard the merchants' voices loudly advertising their products. Get your fresh pickled ifs, ands, or buts. Hey-ya, 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 nice recipe nice ripe whens and wares. Juicy, tempting words for sale. So many words and so many people. They were from every place imaginable, and some places even beyond that. And they were all busy sorting, choosing, and stuffing things into cases. As soon as one was filled, another was begun. And there seemed to be no end to the bustle and activity. Milo and Talk wandered up and down the aisles looking at the wonderful assortments of words for sale. There were short ones and easy ones for everyday use, and long and very important ones for special occasions, and even some marvelously fancy ones packed in individual gift boxes for use in royal decrees and pronouncements. Step right up, fancy, best quality words right here, announced one man in a booming voice. Step right up. Hey, what can I do for you, little boy? How about a nice bag full of pronouns? Or maybe you'd like our special assortment of names. Milo had never thought much about words before, but these looked so good that he longed to have some. Look, Talk, he cried. Aren't they wonderful? They're fine, if you have something to say, replied Talk in a tired voice, for he was much more interested in finding a bone than shopping for new words. Maybe if I buy some, I can learn how to use them, said Milo eagerly as he began to pick through the words in the stall. Finally, he chose 3 which looked particularly good to him: quagmire, flabbergast, and upholstery. He had no idea what they meant, but they looked very grand and elegant. How much are these? He inquired, and when the man whispered the answer, he quickly put them back on the shelf and started to walk on. Why not take a few pounds of happies? Advised the salesman. They're much more practical, and very useful for happy birthday, happy new year, happy days, happy-go-lucky. I'd like to very much, began Milo, but... Or perhaps you'd be interested in a package of goods. Always handy for good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and goodbye, he suggested. Milo did want to buy something, but the only money he had was the coin he needed to get back to the toll booth. And Tuck, of course, had nothing but the time. No, thank you, replied Milo. We're just looking. And they continued through the market. As they turned down the last aisle of stalls, Milo noticed a wagon that seemed different from the rest. On its side was a small, neatly lettered sign that says, Do It Yourself. And inside were 26 bins filled with all the letters of the alphabets from A to Z. These are for people who like to make their own words, the man in charge informed him. You can pick any assortment you like, or buy a special box complete with all the letters, punctuation marks, and a book of instructions. Here, taste an A. They're very good. Milo nibbled carefully at the letter and discovered that it was quite sweet and delicious, just the way you expect an A to taste. I knew you'd like it, laughed the letter man, popping 2 G's and an R into his mouth and letting the juice drip down his chin. A's are one of our most popular letters. All of them aren't that good, he confided in a low voice. Take the Z, for instance. Very dry and sawdusty. And the X? Why, it tastes like a trunk full of stale air. That's why people hardly ever use them. But most of the others are quite tasty. Try some more. He gave Milo an I, which was icy and refreshing, and Talk a crisp, crunchy C. Most people are just too lazy to make their own words, he continued, but it's much more fun. Is it difficult? I'm not much good at making words, admitted Milo, spitting the pits from a P. Perhaps I can be of some assistance? ASSISTANCE, buzzed an unfamiliar voice, and when Milo looked up he saw an enormous bee, at least twice his size, sitting on top of the wagon. I am the spelling bee, announced the spelling bee. Don't be alarmed. ALARMED. Talk ducked under the wagon, and Milo, who was not overly fond of normal-sized bees, began to back away slowly. I can spell anything. ANYTHING, he boasted, testing his wings. Try me. Can you spell goodbye? Suggested Milo as he continued to back away. The bee gently lifted himself into the air and circled lazily over Milo's head. Perhaps, PERHAPS, you are under the misapprehension, MISAPPREHENSION, that I am dangerous, he said, turning a smart loop to the left. Let me assure, ASSURE, that my intentions are peaceful, PEACEFUL. And with that he settled back on the top of the wagon and fanned himself with one wing. Now, he panted, think of the most difficult word you can, and I'll spell it. Hurry up. And he jumped up and down impatiently. He looks friendly enough, thought Milo, not sure how friendly a friendly bumblebee should be, and tried to think of a very difficult word. Spell vegetable, he suggested, for it was one that always troubled him at school. That is a difficult one, said the bee, winking at the letterman. Let me see now. He frowned and wiped his brow and paced slowly back and forth on top of the wagon. How much time do I have? Just 10 seconds, cried Milo excitedly. Count them off, Talk. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, the bee repeated, continuing to pace nervously. Then, just as the time ran out, he spelled as fast as he could. Vegetable. Correct, shouted the little man, and everyone cheered. Can you spell everything? Asked Milo admiringly. Just about, replied the bee, with a hint of pride in his voice. You see, years ago I was just an ordinary bee minding my own business, smelling flowers all day, and occasionally picking up a part-time work in people's bonnets. Then one day I realized that I never amount to anything without an education, and, being naturally adept at spelling, I decided that balderdash, shouted a booming voice, and from around the wagon stepped a large beetle-like insect dressed in a lavish coat, striped pants, checked vest, spats, and a derby hat. Let me repeat, balderdash, he shouted again, swinging his cane and clicking his heels in midair. Come now, don't be ill-mannered. Isn't somebody going to introduce me to the little boy? This, said the bee in complete disdain, is the humbug, a very dislikable fellow. Nonsense! Everyone loves a humbug, shouted the humbug. As I was saying just to the king the other day. You never met the king, the bee said angrily. Then turning to Milo, he said, Don't believe anything this old frog says. Bosh! Replied the humbug. We're an old and noble family, honorable to the core, insecticus humbugium, if I may use the Latin. Why, we fought in the Crusades with Richard the Lionheart, crossed the Atlantic with Columbus, blazed trails with the pioneers, and today many members of the family hold prominent government positions throughout the world. History is full of humbugs. A very pretty speech, S-P-E-E-C-H, sneered the bee. Now why did you go away? I was just advising the lad on the importance of proper spelling. Bah! Said the humbug, putting her arm around Milo. As soon as you learn to spell one word, as soon as you learn to spell one word, they all ask you to spell another. You can never catch up, so why bother? Take my advice, my boy, and forget about it. As my great-great-grandfather George Washington Humbug used to say. You, sir, shouted the bee very excitedly, are an impostor. I am P-O-S-T-O-R, who can't even spell his own name. A slavish concern for the composition of words is a sign of a bankrupt intellect, roared the humbug, waving his cane furiously. Milo didn't have any idea what this meant, but it seemed to infuriate the spelling bee, who flew down and knocked off the humbug's hat with his wing. Be careful, shouted Milo as the bug swung his cane again, catching the bee on the foot and knocking over the box of W's. My foot, shouted the bee. My hat, shouted the bug, and the fight was on. The spelling bee buzzed dangerously in and out of range of the humbug's wild swinging cane as they menaced each other and threatened each other, and the crowd stepped back out of the danger. There must be some other way to... began Milo. Then he yelled, Watch out! But it was too late. There was a tremendous crash as the humbug in his great fury tripped onto one of the stalls, knocking into another, then another, and then another, until every stall in the market had been upset, and the words lay scrambled in great confusion all over the square. The bee, who had tangled himself in some bunting, toppled to the ground, knocking Milo over on top of him, and laid there shouting, Help! Help! There's a little boy on me! The bug sprawled untidily onto a mound of squashed letters, and Talk, in his alarm ringing persistently, was buried under a pile of words. Chapter 5. Short Shrift. Look what you've done! Or, done what you've looked, angrily shouted one of the salesmen. He meant to say, look what you've done, but the words had gone so hopelessly mixed up that no one could make any sense at all. To going to what we are, complained another, as everyone set about straightening things up as well as they could. For several minutes no one spoke an understandable sentence, which added greatly to the confusion. As soon as possible, however, the stalls were righted and the words swept up into one large pile for sorting. Excuse me. Excuse me. The spelling bee, who was quite upset by the whole affair, had flown off in a huff, and just as Milo got to his feet, the entire police force of Dictionopolis appeared, loudly blowing his whistle. Now we'll get to the bottom of this, he heard someone say. Here comes Officer Shrift. Striding across the square was the shortest policeman Milo had ever seen. He was scarcely 2 feet tall and almost twice as wide, and he wore a blue uniform with a white belt and gloves, and a peaked cap, and a very fierce expression. He continued blowing the whistle until his face was beet red, stopping only enough to shout, "You're guilty! You're guilty!" to everyone he passed. "I've never seen anyone so guilty," he said as he reached Milo. And then turning towards Talk, who was still ringing loudly, he said, "Turn off that dog! It's disrespectful to sound your alarm in the presence of a policeman." He made a careful note of that in his black book and strode up and down, his hands clasped behind his back, surveying the wreckage of the marketplace. Very pretty, he scowled. "Who's responsible for all of this? Speak up or I'll arrest the lot of you." There was a long silence, since hardly anybody had actually seen... Oh my, what did I just do? Oh no, what did I just do? Hold on. Ah, okay. That was weird. Okay, hold on. Ah! I don't even know how I did that. Ah! Okay, There was a long silence. Since hardly anybody had actually seen what had happened, no one spoke. "You," said the policeman, pointing an accusing finger at the humbug, who was brushing himself off and straightening his hat. "You look suspicious to me." The startled humbug dropped his cane and nervously replied, "Let me assure you, good sir, on my honor as a gentleman, that I was merely an innocent bystander, minding my own business, enjoying the stimulating sights and sounds of the world of commerce, when this young lad—" "Aha!" interrupted Officer Shrift, making another note in his little book. "Just as I thought. Boys are the cause of everything." "Pardon me," insisted the humbug, "but I in no way meant to imply that—" "Silence!" thundered the policeman, pulling himself to full height and glaring menacingly at the terrified bug. "And now," he continued, speaking to Milo, "where were you on the night of July 27th? "What does that have to do with anything?" asked Milo. "It's my birthday, that's what," said the policeman as he entered. "Forgot my birthday in his little book. Boys always forget other people's birthdays. You have committed the following crimes," he continued. "Having a dog with an unauthorized alarm, sowing confusion, upsetting the apple cart, wreaking havoc, and mincing words." "Now see here," growled Talk angrily. "And illegal barking," he added, frowning at the watchdog. "It is against the law to bark without using the barking meter. Are you ready to be sentenced?" "Only a judge can sentence you," said Milo, who remembered reading that in one of his school books. "Good point," replied the policeman, taking off his cap and putting on a long black robe. "I am also the judge. Now would you like a long or a short sentence?" A short one, if you please," said Milo. "Good," said the judge, rapping his gavel 3 times. "I always have trouble remembering the long ones. How about I am? That's the shortest sentence I know." Everyone agreed that this was a very fair sentence, and the judge continued. "There will also be a small additional penalty of 6 million years imprisoned. Case closed," he pronounced, rapping his gavel again. "Come with me. I'll take you to the dungeon." "Only a jailer can put you in prison," offered Milo, quoting the same book. "Good point," said the judge, removing his robe and taking out a large bunch of keys. "I am also the jailer." And with that he led them away. "Keep your chin up," shouted the humbug. "Maybe they'll take 1,000,000 years off for good behavior." The heavy prison door swung back slowly, and Milo and Talk followed Officer Shrift down a long, dark corridor, lit only by the occasional flickering candle. "Watch the steps," he advised the policeman as they started down a steep circular staircase. The air was dank and musty, like the smell of wet blankets, and the massive stone walls were slimy to the touch. Down and down they went until they arrived at another door even heavier and stronger looking than the first. A cobweb brushed across Milo's face, and he shuddered. "You'll find it quite pleasant here," chuckled the policeman as he slid the bolt back and pushed the door open with a screech and a squeak. "Not much company, but you can always chat with the witch." "The witch?" trembled Milo. "Yes, she's been here a long time," he said, starting along another corridor. In a few more minutes they had gone through 3 other doors, crossed a narrow footbridge, down 2 more corridors and along another stairway, and stood finally in front of a small cell door. "This is it," said the policeman. "All the comforts of home." The door opened and then shut, and Milo and Talk found themselves in a highly vaulted ceiling with 2 tiny windows halfway up the wall. "See you in 6 million years," said Officer Shrift, and the sound of his footsteps grew fainter and fainter until it wasn't heard at all. It looks very serious, doesn't it, Talk? Said Milo very sadly. It certainly does, the dog replied, sniffing around to see what their new quarters were like. I don't know what we're going to do for all that time. We don't even have a checker set or a box of crayons. Don't worry, growled Talk, raising one paw assuringly. Something will turn up. Here, wind me, will you please? I'm beginning to run down. You know something, Talk, he said as he wound up the dog. You can get in a lot of trouble mixing up words or just not knowing how to spell them. If we ever get out of here, I'm going to make sure to learn all about them. A very commendable ambition, young man. A very commendable ambition, young man, said a small voice from across the cell. Milo looked up very surprised, and he noticed for the first time in the half-lit room a pleasant-looking old lady quietly knitting and rocking. Hello, he said. How do you do, she replied. You better be very careful, Milo advised. I understand there's a witch somewhere in here. I am she, the old lady answered casually, and pulled her shawl a little closer around her shoulders. Milo dropped back in fright and quickly grabbed Talk to make sure that his alarm didn't go off, for he knew how much witches hated loud noises. Don't be frightened, she laughed. I'm not a witch. I'm a witch. Oh, said Milo, because he couldn't think of anything else to say. I'm faintly macabre, the not-so-wicked witch, she continued, and I'm certainly not going to harm you. What's a witch? Asked Milo, releasing Talk and stepping a little closer. Well, said the old lady, just as a rat scurried across her foot, I am the king's great-aunt. For years and years I was in charge of choosing which words were to be used for all occasions, which ones to say and which ones not to say, and which ones to write and which ones not to write. As you can well imagine, with all the thousands to choose from, it was the most important and responsible job. I was given the title of official witch, which made me very proud and happy. At first I did my best to make sure that the only most proper and fitting words were used. Everything was said clearly and simply, and no words were wasted. I had signs posted all over the palace and marketplace which said, Brevity is the soul of wit, but power corrupts, and soon I grew miserly, and chose fewer and fewer words, trying to keep as many as possible for myself. I had new signs posted which said, An ill-chosen word is the fool's messenger. Soon sales began to fall off in the market. The people were afraid to buy as many words as before, and hard times came to the kingdom. But still I grew more and more miserly. Soon there were so few words chosen that hardly anything could be said, and even casual conversation became difficult. Again I had new signs posted which says, Speak filthy or be silent wisely. Speak fitly or be silent wisely. And finally I had even these replaced by ones that read simply, Silence is golden. All stopped talking. No words were sold, and the marketplace closed down, and the people grew poor and disconsolate. When the king saw what had happened, he became furious and had me cast into this dungeon where you see me now, an older and wiser woman. That was all many years ago, she continued. But they never appointed a new witch, and that explains why today many people use as many words as they can and think themselves very wise for doing so. For always remember that while it's wrong to use too few, it's often far worse to use too many. When she had finished, she sighed deeply, patted Milo gently on the shoulder, and began to knitting once more. And you have been down here ever since then? Asked Milo sympathetically. Yes, she said sadly, for most people have forgotten me entirely, or remember me wrongly as a witch and not a witch. Yet it matters not, she went on unhappily, for they are equally frightened of both. I don't think you're frightening, said Milo, and Talk wagged his tail in agreement. I thank you very much, said the faintly macabre. You may call me Aunt Faintly. Here, have a punctuation mark. And she held out a box of sugar-coated question marks, periods, commas, and exclamation points. That's all I get to eat now. Well, when I get out of here, I'm going to help you, Milo declared forcefully. That's very nice of you, she replied, but the only thing that can help me is the return of rhyme and reason. The return of what? Asked Milo. Rhyme and reason, she repeated. But that's another long story, and you may not want to hear it. We would like to very much, barked Talk. We really would, agreed Milo, and as the witch rocked slowly back and forth, she told him this story. Chapter 6. Faintly Macabre's Story. Once upon a time, this land was a barren and frightful wilderness, whose high rocky mountains sheltered the evil winds, and whose barren valleys offered hospitality to no man. Few things grew, and those that did were bent and twisted, and their fruit was as bitter as wormwood. What wasn't waste was desert, and what wasn't desert was rock, and the demons of darkness made their home in the hills. Evil creatures roamed at will through the countryside and down to the sea. It was known as the Land of Null. Then one day a small ship appeared on the Sea of Knowledge. It carried a young prince seeking the future. In the name of goodness and truth, he laid claim to all the country and set out to explore his new domain. The demons, monsters, and giants were furious at this presumption and banded together to drive him out. The earth shook with their battle, and when they had finished, all that remained to the prince was a small piece of land at the edge of the sea. I'll build my city here, he declared, and that is what he did. Before long, more ships came bearing settlers for the new land, and the city grew and pushed its boundaries farther and farther out. Each day it was attacked anew, but nothing could destroy the prince's new city. And grow it did. Soon it was no longer just a city. It was a kingdom, and it was called the Kingdom of Wisdom. But outside the walls, all was not safe, and the new king vowed to conquer the land that was so rightfully his. So each spring he set forth with his army, and each autumn he returned, and year by year the kingdom grew larger and more prosperous. He took to himself a wife, and before long had 2 fine young sons, whom he taught everything he knew, so that one day they might rule wisely. When the boys grew to young manhood, the king called them to him and said, I am becoming an old man, and I can no longer go forth in battle. You must take my place and found new cities in the wilderness, for the kingdom of wisdom must grow. And so they did. One went south to the foothills of confusion to build Dictionopolis, the city of words. And one went to the north to the mountains of ignorance and built Digitopolis, the city of numbers. Both cities flourished mightily, and the demons were driven back still further. Soon the other cities and towns were founded in the new lands, and at last only the farthest reaches of the wilderness remained to these terrible creatures. And there they waited, ready to strike down all those who ventured near or relaxed their guard. The 2 brothers were glad, however, to go their separate ways, for they were by nature very suspicious and jealous. Each one tried to outdo the other, and they worked so hard and diligently at it that before long their cities rivaled even wisdom in size and grandeur. Words are more important than wisdom, one said privately. Numbers are more important than wisdom, thought the other to himself, and they grew to dislike each other more and more. The old king, however, who knew nothing of his son's animosity, was very happy in the twilight of his reign, and spent his days quietly walking and contemplating in the royal gardens. His only regret is that he never had a daughter, for he loved little girls as much as he loved little boys. One day, as he was strolling peacefully about the grounds, he discovered 2 tiny babies that had been abandoned in a basket under the grape arbor. They were beautiful golden-haired girls. The king was overjoyed. They have been sent to crown my old age, he cried, and called the queen, his ministers, and palace staff, and indeed the entire population to see them. We'll call this one Rhyme, and this one Reason, he said, and so they became the princess of sweet rhyme and the princess of pure reason, and were brought up in the palace. When the old king finally died, the kingdom was divided between his 2 sons, with the provisions that they would be equally responsible for the welfare of the young princesses. One son went south and became Azaz the Unabridged, king of Dictionopolis, and the other went north and became the mathematician, ruler of Digitopolis. And, true to their word, they both provided well for the little girls, who continued to live in wisdom. Everyone loved the princesses because of their great beauty, their gentle ways, and their ability to settle all controversies fairly and reasonably. People with problems or grievances or arguments came from all over the land to seek advice, and even the 2 brothers by this time were fighting continuously, often called upon them to help decide matters of state. It was said by everyone that rhyme and reason answered all problems. As the years passed, the two brothers grew farther and farther apart, and the separate kingdoms became richer and grander. Their disputes, however, became more and more difficult to reconcile. But always, with patience and love, the princesses set things right. Then one day, they had the most terrible quarrel of all. King Azaz insisted that words were far more significant than numbers, and hence his kingdom was truly the greater. And the mathematician claimed that the numbers were much more important than words, and hence his kingdom was supreme. They discussed and debated and raved and ranted till on the verge of blows, when it was decided to submit the questions to arbitration by the princesses. After days of careful consideration in which all the evidence was weighed and all the witnesses heard, they made the decision. Words and numbers are of equal value, for in the cloak of knowledge one is warped and the other woof. It is no more important to count the sands than it is to name the stars. Therefore let both kingdoms live in peace. Everyone was pleased with the verdict. Everyone it is, but the brothers, who were beside themselves with anger. What good are these girls if they cannot settle an argument in someone's favor, they growled, and since both were more interested in their own advantages than in the truth. We'll banish them from the kingdom forever. And so they were taken from the palace and sent far away to the castle in the air, and have not been seen since. That is why today, in all this land, there is neither rhyme nor reason. And what happened to the two rulers? Asked Milo. Banishing the two princesses was the last thing they ever agreed upon, and they soon fell into warring with each other. Despite this, their own kingdoms have continued to prosper, but the old city of wisdom has fallen to great disrepair, and there is no one to set things right. So you see, until the princesses return, I shall have to stay here. Maybe we can rescue them, Milo said as he saw how sad the witch looked. That would be difficult, she replied. The castle in the air is far from here, and the one stairway which leads to it is guarded by fierce and black-hearted demons. Talk growled almost ominously, for he hated even the thought of demons. I'm afraid there's not much a little boy and a dog can do, she said. But never you mind. It's not so bad. I've grown quite used to it here. But you must be going, or else you'll waste the whole day. Oh, we're here for 6 million years, sighed Milo, and I don't see any way to escape. Nonsense, scolded the witch. You mustn't take Officer Shrift so seriously. He loves to put people in prison, but he doesn't care about keeping them there. Now just press the button in the wall and be on your way. Milo pressed the button and the door swung open, letting in a shaft of brilliant sunshine. Goodbye, come again, shouted the witch as they stepped outside and the door slammed shut. Milo and Talk stood blinking in the bright light, and, as their eyes became accustomed to it, the first thing they saw was the king's advisors again rushing towards them. Ah, there you are! Where have you been? We've been looking all over for you. The royal banquet is about to begin. Come with us. They seemed very agitated and out of breath as Milo walked along with them. But what about my car? Don't need it, replied the Duke. No use for it, said the minister. Superfluous, advised the Count. Unnecessary, stated the Earl. Uncalled for, cried the Undersecretary. We'll take our veal. Conveyance, rig, charabanc, chariot, buggy, coach, brougham. Sanjdan, they replied quickly in order, and pointed to a small wooden wagon. Oh dear, all those words again, thought Milo as he climbed into the wagon with Talk and the cabinet members. How are you going to make it move? It doesn't have a... Be very quiet, advised the Duke, for it goes without saying. And, sure enough, as soon as they were all quite still, it began to move quickly to the streets. In a very short time they arrived at the royal palace. Chapter 7. The Royal Banquet. Right this way. Follow us. Come along. Step lively. Here we go, they shouted, hopping from the wagon and bounding up the broad marble stairway. Milo and Talk followed closely behind. It was a strange-looking palace, and if he didn't know better, Milo would have said that it looked exactly like an enormous book, standing on end, with its front door in the lower part of the bindings, just where they usually placed the publisher's name. Once inside, they hurried down a long hallway, which glittered with crystal chandeliers and echoed with their footsteps. The walls and ceilings were covered in mirrors, whose reflections danced dizzily along with them, and the footman bowed coldly. "We must be terribly late," gasped the Earl nervously as they reached the tall doors of the banquet. It was a vast room, full of people loudly talking and arguing. The long table was carefully set with golden plates and linen napkins. An attendant stood behind each chair, and at the center, raised slightly above the others, was a throne covered in crimson cloth. Directly behind, on the wall, was a royal coat of arms, flanked by the flags of Dictionopolis. Milo noticed many of the people he had seen in the marketplace. The letterman was busy explaining to an interested group the history of the W, and off in the corner the humbug and the spelling bee were arguing fiercely about nothing at all. Officer Shrift wandered through the crowd, suspiciously muttering, "Guilty, guilty, they're all guilty," and on noticing Milo, brightened visibly, commended in passing, "Is it 6 million years already? My, how time flies." Everyone seemed quite grumpy about having to wait for lunch, and they were all relieved to see the tardy guests arrive. "Certainly glad you finally made it, old man," said the humbug cordially, pumping Milo's hand. "As a guest of honor, you must choose the menu, of course." "Oh my," he thought, not knowing what to say. "Be quick about it," suggested the spelling bee. "I'm famished. Famished. As Milo tried to think, there was an ear-shattering blast of trumpets, entirely off-key, and a page announced to the startled guest, "King Azaz the Unabridged." The king strode through the door and over to the table and settled his great bulk onto the throne, calling irritably, "Places, everyone! Take your places!" He was the largest man Milo had ever seen, with a great stomach, large piercing eyes, a grey beard that reached to his waist, and a silver signet ring on his little finger of his left hand. He also wore a small crown and a robe with the letters of the alphabet beautifully embroidered all over it. "What do we have here?" he said, staring down at Tok and Milo as everyone else took his place. "If you please," said Milo. "My name is Milo, and this is Tok. Thank you very much for inviting us to your banquet, and I think your palace is beautiful." "Exquisite," corrected the Duke. "Lovely," counseled the minister. "Handsome," recommended the Count. "Pretty," hinted the Earl. "Charming," submitted the Undersecretary. "Silence!" suggested the King. "Now, young man, what can you do to entertain us? Sing songs? Tell stories? Compose sonnets? Juggle plates? Do tumbling tricks? Which is it?" I can't do any of those things," admitted Milo. "What an ordinary little boy," commented the King. "Why, my cabinet members can do all sorts of things. The Duke here can make mountains out of molehills. The minister splits hairs. The Count makes hay while the sun shines. The Earl leaves no stone unturned. And the Secretary," he finished anonymously, "hangs by a thread. Can you do anything at all?" "I can count to 1,000, offered Milo. "Ah! Numbers! Never mention numbers here. Only use them when we absolutely have to," growled Azaz disgustedly. "Now, why don't you and Tok come up here and sit next to me, and we'll have some dinner." "Are you ready with the menu?" reminded the humbug. "Well," said Milo, remembering that his mother had always told him to eat lightly when he was a guest. "Why don't we have a light meal?" "A light meal it shall be," roared the bug, waving his hands. The waiters rushed in carrying large serving platters and set them on the table in front of the king. When he lifted the covers, shafts of brilliant colored light leaped from the plates and bounced around the ceilings and walls, across the floor and out the windows. "Not a very substantial meal," said the humbug, rubbing his eyes, "but quite an attractive one. Perhaps you can suggest something a little more filling." The king clapped his hands, and the platters were removed, and, without thinking, Milo quickly suggested, "Well, in that case, we ought to have a square meal it is!" shouted the humbug again. The king clapped his hands once more, and the waiters reappeared carrying plates heaped high with steaming squares of all sizes and colors. "Ugh," said the spelling bee, tasting one. "These are awful." No one else seemed to like them very much either, and the humbug got one caught in his throat and almost choked. Time for speeches, announced the king, as the plates were once again removed and everyone looked glum. You first, he commanded, pointing to Milo. Your Majesty, ladies and gentlemen, stated Milo timidly, I would like to take this opportunity to say that in all the— That's quite enough, snapped the king. Mustn't talk all day. But I'd just begun, objected Milo. Next! Bellowed the king. Roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, vanilla ice cream, recited the humbug, bouncing up and down quickly. What a strange speech, thought Milo, for he heard many in the past and knew that they were supposed to be long and dull. Hamburgers, corn on the cob, chocolate pudding, pudding, said the spelling bee in his turn. Frankfurters, sour pickles, strawberry jams, offered Officer Shrift from his chair. Since he was taller sitting than standing, he didn't bother to get up. And so down the line it went, with each guest raising briefly, making a short speech, and then resuming his place. When everyone had finished, the king rose. Pâté de foie gras, soupe de l'oignon, faisans sous cloche, salade endive, fromage de fruits des demi-tasse, he said carefully, and clapped his hands again. The waiters reappeared immediately, carrying heavy hot trays which they set on the table. Each one contained the exact words spoken by the various guests, and they all began eating immediately with great gusto. Dig in, said the king, poking Milo with his elbow and looking disapprovingly at his plate. I can't say that I think much of your choice. I didn't know that I was going to have to eat my words, objected Milo. Of course, everyone here does, the king grunted. You should have made a tastier speech. Milo looked around at everyone busily stuffing himself and then back at his own unappetizing plate. It certainly didn't look worth eating, and he was so very hungry. Here, try some somersault, suggested the Duke. It improves the flavor. Have a rigmarole, offered the Count, passing the bread basket. Or a ragamuffin, seconded the minister. Perhaps you care for a cinnamon bun, suggested the Duke. Why not wait for your just desserts, mumbled the Earl indistinctly, his mouth full of food. How many times must I tell you not to bite off more than you can chew? Snapped the undersecretary, patting the distressed Earl on the back. In one ear and out the other, scolded the Duke, attempting to stuff one of his words through the Earl's head. If it isn't one thing, it's another, chided the minister. Out of the frying pan and into the fire, shouted the Count, burning himself badly. Well, you don't have to bite my head off, screamed the terrified Earl, and flew at the others in a rage. The five of them scuffled wildly under the table. Stop that at once, thundered Azaz, or I'll banish the lot of you. Sorry, excuse me, forgive us, pardon, regrets. They apologized in turn, and sat down glaring at each other. The rest of the meal was finished in silence until the king, wiping the gravy stains from his vest, called for dessert. Milo, who had not eaten anything, looked up eagerly. We're having a special treat today, said the king as the delicious smells of homemade pastry filled the banquet hall. By royal command, the pastry chefs have worked all night in the half bakery to make sure that— The half bakery? Questioned Milo. Of course the half bakery, snapped the king. Where do you think half-baked ideas come from? Now, please don't interrupt. By royal command, the pastry chefs have worked all night to— What's a half-baked idea? Asked Milo again. Will you be quiet? Growled Azaz angrily. Before he could begin again, 3 large serving carts wheeled into the hall and everyone jumped up to help themselves. They're very tasty, explained the humbug, but they don't always agree with you. Here's one that's very good. He handed it to Milo, and through the icing and nuts, Milo saw that it said, the earth is flat. People swallow that one for years. Oh, people swallow that one for years, commented the spelling bee, but it's not very popular these days. D-A-Y-S. He picked up the long one that said, the moon is made of green cheese, and hungrily bit off the part that said cheese. Now there's a half-baked idea, he said, smiling. Milo looked at the great assortment of cakes, which were being eaten almost as quickly as anyone could read them. The Count was munching contentedly on It Never Rains But It Pours, and the king was busily slicing one that stated, Night air is bad air. I wouldn't eat too many of those if I were you, advised Talk. They may look good, but you can get terribly sick of them. Don't worry, Milo repeated. I'll just wrap one up for later. And he folded his napkin around. Everything happens for the best. 8. The Humbug Volunteers. Couldn't eat another thing, puffed the Duke, clutching his stomach. Oh my, oh dear, agreed the minister, breathing with great difficulty. Mumbled the Earl, desperately trying to swallow another mouthful. Thoroughly stuffed, sighed the Count, loosening his belt. Full up, grunted the Undersecretary, reaching for the last cake. As everyone finished, only the sounds to be heard were the creaking of chairs, the pushing of plates, the licking of spoons, and of course, a few words from the humbug. A delightful repast, delicately prepared and elegantly served, he announced to no one in particular. A feast of rare bouquet. My compliments to the chef, by all means. My compliments to the chef. Then, with a most distressed look on his face, he turned to Milo and gasped. Would you kindly fetch me a glass of water? I see him to have a touch of indigestion. Perhaps you've eaten too much too quickly, Milo remarked sympathetically. Too much too quickly, wheezed the uncomfortable bug between gulps. To be sure, too much too quickly. I most certainly should have eaten too little too slowly, or too much too slowly, or too little too quickly, or taken all day to eat nothing, or eat everything in no time at all, or occasionally eaten something at any time, or perhaps I should have... And then he toppled back exhausted into his chair and continued to mumble indistinctly. Attention! Let me have your attention! Insisted the king, leaping to his feet and pounding the table. The command was entirely unnecessary, for the moment he began to speak, everyone but Milo, Talk, and the distraught bug rushed from the hall, down the stairs, and out the palace. Royal subjects and friends, continued Azaz, his voice echoing through the almost empty room. Once again, on this gala occasion, we have... pardon me, coughed Milo, as politely as possible, but everyone has gone. I was hoping no one would notice, said the king sadly. It happens every time. They've all gone to dinner, announced the humbug weakly, and just as soon as I catch my breath I shall join them. That's ridiculous. How can they eat dinner right after a banquet? Asked Milo. Scandalous, shouted the king. We'll put a stop to it at once. From now on, by royal command, everyone must eat dinner before the banquet. But that's just as bad, protested Milo. You mean just as good, corrected the humbug. Things which are equally bad are also equally good. Try to look at the bright side of things. I don't know which side of anything to look at, protested Milo. Everything is so confusing, all your words only make things worse. How true, said the unhappy king, resting his regal chin on his royal fist as he thought fondly of the old days. There must be something we can do about it. Pass a law, the humbug suggested brightly. We have almost as many laws as words, grumbled the king. Offer a reward, the bug said again. The king shook his head and looked sadder and sadder. Send for help, drive a bargain, pull the switch, file a brief, lower the broom, tow the line, raise the bridge, bar the door, shouted the bug, jumping up and down and waving his arms. Then he promptly sat down as the king glanced furiously in his direction. Perhaps he might allow Rhyme and Reason to return, said Milo softly, for he had been waiting for just such an opportunity to suggest it. How nice would that be? How nice that would be, said Azaz, straightening up and adjusting his crown. Even if they were a bother at times, things always went so well when they were here. As he spoke, he leaned back on the throne, clasped his hands behind his head, and stared thoughtfully at the ceiling. But I'm afraid it can't be done. Certainly not. It can't be done, repeated the humbug. Why not? Asked Milo. Why not, indeed, exclaimed the bug, who seemed equally at home on either side of an argument. Much too difficult, replied the king. Of course, emphasized the bug. Much too difficult. You could if you really wanted to, insisted Milo. By all means, if you really want to, you could, agreed the humbug. How? Asked Azaz, glaring at the bug. How? Inquired Milo, looking the same way. A simple task, began the humbug, suddenly wishing he were somewhere else. For a brave lad with a stout heart, a steadfast dog, and a serviceable small automobile. Go on, commanded the king. Yes, please, seconded Milo. All that he would have to do, continued the worried bug, is travel through miles of harrowing and hazardous countryside into unknown valleys and uncharted forests, past yawning chasms and trackless wastes, until he reached Digitopolis, if, of course, he ever reached there. Then he would have to persuade the Math-magician to agree to release the little princesses. And, of course, he'd never agree to anything that you agree with. And, anyway, if he did, you certainly wouldn't agree to it. From there is a much simpler matter of entering the mountain of ignorance, full of perilous pitfalls and ominous overtones, a land to which many venture but few return, and whose evil demons slither slowly from peak to peak in search of prey. Oh my, excuse me. Excuse me. Sorry for that. Then an effortless climb up a 2,000-step circular stairway without railings in a high wind at night. For those in the mountains, it is always night. To the castle in the air. He paused momentarily for breath and then began again. After a pleasant chat with the princesses, all that remains is a leisurely ride back to the chaotic crags whose frightening fiends have sworn to tear any intruder limb from limb and devour him down to his belt buckle. And finally, after the long ride back, a triumphal parade, if of course there is anything left to parade, followed by hot chocolate and cookies for everyone. The humbug bowed low and sat down once again, very pleased with himself. I never realized it would be so simple, said the king, stroking his beard and smiling broadly. Quite simple indeed, concurred the bug. It sounds dangerous to me, said Milo. Most dangerous, mumbled the humbug, still trying to be in agreement with everybody. Who will make the journey? asked Talk, who had been listening very carefully to the humbug's descriptions. A very good question, replied the king. But there is one far more serious problem. What is it? Asked Milo, who was rather unhappy at the turn the conversation had taken. I'm afraid I can tell you that only when you return, cried the king, clapping his hands 3 times. As he did so, the waiters rushed back into the room and quickly cleared away the dishes, the silver, the tablecloths, the table, the chairs, the banquet hall, and the palace, leaving them all suddenly standing in the marketplace. Of course you realize that I would like to make the trip myself, continued Azaz, striding across the square as if nothing had happened. But since it was your idea, you shall have all the honor and fame. But you see, began Milo. Dictionopolis will always be grateful, my boy, interrupted the king, throwing one arm around Milo and patting Talk with the other. You will face many dangers on your journey, but fear not, for I brought you this for your protection. He drew from inside his cape a small heavy box about the size of a school book and handed it ceremoniously to Milo. In this box are all the words I know, he said. Most of them you will never need. Some you will use constantly, but with them you may ask all the questions which have never been answered, and answer all the questions which have never been asked. All the great books of the past and all the ones that have yet to come are made with these words. With them there is no obstacle you cannot overcome. All you must learn to do is use them well and in the right places. Milo accepted the gift with thanks, and the little group walked to the car, still parked at the edge of the square. You will, of course, need a guide, said the king. And since he knows the obstacles so well, the humbug has cheerfully volunteered to accompany you. Now see here, cried the startled bug, for that was the last thing in the world he wanted to do. You will find him dependable, brave, resourceful, and loyal, continued Azaz, and the humbug was so overcome by the flattery that he quite forgot to object again. I'm sure he'll be a great help, cried Milo as they drove across the square. I hope so, thought Talk to himself, for he was far less sure. Good luck, and do be careful, shouted the king, and down the road they went. Milo and Talk wondered what strange adventure lay ahead. The humbug speculated on how he'd ever become involved in such a hazardous undertaking, and the crowd waved and cheered wildly, for, while they didn't care at all about anyone arriving, they were always very pleased to see someone go. Chapter 9. It's all in how you look at things. Soon all traces of Dictionopolis had vanished in the distance, and all those strange and unknown lands that lay between the kingdom of words and the kingdom of numbers stretched before them. It was a late afternoon, and the dark orange sun floated heavily over the distant mountains. A friendly, cool breeze slapped playfully at the car, and the long shadows stretched out lazily from the trees and bushes. Ah, the open road, exclaimed the humbug, breathing deeply, for he now seemed happily resigned to the trip. The spirit of adventure, the lure of the unknown, the thrill of the gallant quest. How very grand indeed. Then, pleased with himself, he folded his arms and sat back, and left it at that. In a few more minutes they had left the open countryside and driven into a dense forest. This is the scenic route, straight ahead to the point of view, announced a rather large road sign. But contrary to its statement, all that could be seen were more trees. As the car rushed along, the trees grew thicker and taller and leafier until, just as they had hidden the sky completely, the forest abruptly ended and the road bent itself around a broad words are getting hard again. Around promontory. Stretching below, to the left, to the right, and straight ahead, as far as anyone could see, lay the rich green landscape through which they had been traveling. Remarkable view, announced the humbug, bouncing from the car as if he were responsible for the whole thing. Isn't it beautiful? Gasped Milo. Oh, I don't know, answered a strange voice. It's all in the way you look at things. I beg your pardon, said Milo, for he didn't see who had spoken. I said it's all in how you look at things, repeated the voice. Milo turned around and found himself staring at two very neatly polished brown shoes, for standing directly in front of him, if he can use the word standing for anyone suspended in midair, was another boy just about his age, whose feet were easily 3 feet off the ground. For instance, the boy continued, if you happen to like deserts, you might not think this is beautiful at all. That is true, said the humbug, who didn't like to contradict anyone whose feet were that far off the ground. For instance, the boy said again, if Christmas tree were people, and people were Christmas trees, we'd all be chopped down, put up in the living room, and covered with tinsel, while the trees opened our presents. What does that have to do with it? Asked Milo. Nothing at all, he answered. But it's an interesting possibility, don't you think? How do you manage to stand up there? Asked Milo, for this was the subject which most interested him. I was about to ask you a similar question, answered the boy, for you must be much older than you looked to be standing on the ground. What do you mean? Milo asked. Well, the boy said, in my family everyone is born in the air, with his head at the exact height he's going to be when he's an adult. Then we all grow towards the ground. When we're fully grown up, or, as you can see, grown down, our feet finally touch. Of course there are a few of us whose feet never reach the ground no matter how old we get, but I suppose it's the same in every family. He hopped a few steps in the air, skipped back to where he started, and then began again. You certainly must be very old to have reached the ground already. Oh no, said Milo seriously. In my family we all start on the ground and grow up, and we never know how far until we actually get there. What a silly system, the boy laughed. Then your head keeps changing its height, and you always see things in a different way? Why, when you're 15, things won't look all the way they did when you were 10, and at 20 everything will change again. I suppose so, replied Milo, for he had never really thought about the matter. We always see things from the same angle, the boy continued. It's much less trouble that way. Besides, it makes more sense to grow down and not up. When you're very young, you can never hurt yourself falling down, if you're in midair, and you certainly can't get into trouble for scuffing up your shoes or marking the floor if there's nothing to scuff them on, and the floor is 3 feet away. That's very true, thought Talk, who wondered how the dogs in the family liked the arrangement. But there are many other ways to look at things, remarked the boy. For instance, you had orange juice, boiled eggs, toast and jam, and milk for breakfast, he said, turning to Milo. And you're always worried about people wasting time, he said to Talk. And you're almost never right about anything, he said, pointing at the humbug. And when you are, it's usually on accident. "A gross exaggeration," protested the furious bug, who didn't realize that so much was visible to the naked eye. "Amazing," gasped Hawk. "How did you know all that?" asked Milo. "Simple," he said proudly. "I am Alec Bings. I see through things. I can see whatever is inside, behind, around, covered by, or subsequent to anything else. In fact, the only thing I can't see is whatever happens is to be right in front of my nose." "Isn't that a little inconvenient?" asked Milo, whose neck was becoming quite stiff from looking up. "It is a little," replied Alec. "But it is quite important to know what lies behind things, and the family helps me take care of the rest. My father sees into things, my mother looks after things, my brother sees beyond things, and my uncle sees the other side of every question. And my little sister Alice sees under things." "How can she see under things if she's all the way up there?" growled the humbug. "Well," added Alex, turning a neat cartwheel, "whatever she can't see under, she overlooks." "Would it be possible for me to see something from up there?" asked Milo politely. "You could," said Alex, "but only if you try very hard to look at things as an adult does." Milo tried as hard as he could, and he did. And as he did, his feet floated slowly off the ground until he was standing in the air next to Alec Bings. He looked around very quickly and, in an instant later, crashed back down to earth. "Interesting, wasn't it?" asked Alex. "Yes, it was," agreed Milo, rubbing his head and dusting himself off. "But I think I'll continue to see things as a child. It's not so far to fall. "A wise decision, at least for the time being," said Alec. "Everyone should have his own point of view." "Isn't this everyone's point of view?" asked Hawk, looking around curiously. "Of course not," replied Alec, sitting himself down on nothing. "It's only mine, and you certainly can't always look at things from someone else's point of view. For instance, from here that looks like a bucket of water," he said, pointing at a bucket of water. "But from an ant's point of view, it's a vast ocean. From an elephant's, it's just a cool drink. And to a fish, of course, it's home. So you see, the way you see things depends a great deal on where you look at them from. Now, come along. I'll show you the rest of the forest." He ran quickly through the air, stopping on occasion to beckon Milo, Talk, and the humbug along, and they followed as well as anyone who had to stay behind on the ground could. "Does everyone here grow the way you do?" puffed Milo when he caught up. "Almost everyone," replied Alec, and then he stopped for a moment and thought. "Now and then, though, someone does begin to grow differently. Instead of down, his feet grows up towards the sky. But we do our best to discourage awkward things like that." "What happens to them?" insisted Milo. "Oddly enough, they often grow 10 times the size of everyone else," said Alec thoughtfully. "And I've heard that they walk among the stars." And with that he skipped off once again towards the waiting wood. "Jack, hi! You are late. We are already 10 chapters in, but it's okay. It's okay. If anything, you can always catch the VOD from the beginning again, so that way you can catch up with us. But hi! Good morning. I'm so happy that you're here. This is Violet. Violet, my slime Violet is here today. Everyone else is still in the incubator, but I have Violet on my head today. Thank you for being here. I'm so happy that you could be here. But yes, we're now 10 chapters in. So if you're not gonna miss very much, you've missed a bit, but I'll have the VOD up later, so that way if you want to catch up, you can. Okay? So don't worry too much about it. I'm just happy that you could be here. I'm gonna take a quick swig of water because I am thirsty. But Jack, now that you're here, we're reading the Phantom Tollbooth. I don't know if we'll be able to finish it today or get through most of it. We're definitely getting through most of it today. Excuse me. Chapter 10, A Colorful Symphony. As they ran, tall trees closed in all around them and arched gracefully towards the sky. The late afternoon sunlight leaped lightly from leaf to leaf, slid along branches and down trunks, and dropped finally to the ground in warm, luminous patches. A soft glow filled the air with the kind of light that made everything look sharp and clear, and close enough to reach out and touch. Alec raced ahead, laughing and shouting, but soon encountered serious difficulties, for, while he could always see the tree behind the next one, he could never see the next one itself, and was continually crashing into it. After about several minutes of wildly dashing about, they all stopped for a breath of air. "I think we're lost," panted the humbug, collapsing to a large berry bush. "Nonsense!" shouted Alec from the high branch on which he sat. "Do you know where we are?" asked Milo. "Certainly," he replied. "We're right here on this very spot. Besides, being lost is never a matter of not knowing where you are. It's a matter of not knowing where you aren't, and I don't care at all about where I'm not." This was much too complicated for the bug to figure out, and Milo had just begun repeating it to himself when Alex said, "If you don't believe me, ask the giant," and he pointed to a small house tucked neatly between two of the largest trees. Milo and Talk walked up to the door, whose brass nameplate simply read, "The Giant," and knocked. "Good afternoon," said the perfectly ordinary-sized man who answered the door. "Are you the giant?" asked Talk doubtfully. "To be sure," he replied proudly. "I am the smallest giant in the world. What can I do for you?" "Are we lost?" said Milo. "That is a difficult question," said the giant. "Why don't you go around back and ask the midget?" And he closed the door. They walked to the rear of the house, which looked exactly like the front, and knocked on the door, whose nameplate read, "The Midget." "How are you?" inquired the man, who looked exactly like the giant. "Are you the midget?" asked Talk again, with a hint of uncertainty to his voice. "Unquestionably," he answered. "I'm the tallest midget in the world. May I help you?" "Do you think we're lost?" repeated Milo. "That is a very complicated problem," he said. "Why don't you go around the side and ask the fat man?" And he too quickly disappeared. The side of the house looked very like the front and the back, and the door flew open at the very instant they knocked. "How nice of you to come by!" exclaimed the man, who could have been the midget's twin brother. "You must be the fat man," said Talk, learning not to count too much on appearance. "The thinnest one in the world," he replied brightly. "But if you have any questions, I suggest you try the thin man on the other side of the house." Just as they suspected, the other side of the house looked exactly the same as the front, back, and side, and the door was once again answered by a man who looked precisely like the other three. "What a pleasant surprise!" he cried happily. "I can't remember having a visitor as long as I can remember." How long is that?" asked Milo. "I'm not sure I know," he replied. "Now pardon me, I have to answer the door." "But you just did," said Talk. "Oh yes, I'd forgotten." "Are you the fattest thin man in the world?" asked Talk. "Do you know one that's fatter?" he asked impatiently. "I think you're all the same man," said Milo empathetically. "Shh," he cautioned, put a finger to his lips and drawing Milo closer. "Do you want to ruin everything? You see, to tall men I'm a midget, and to short men I'm a giant. To the skinny ones I'm a fat man, and to the fat ones I'm a thin man. That way I can hold 4 jobs at once. As you can see, though, I am neither tall nor short, nor fat nor thin. In fact, I'm quite ordinary. There are so many ordinary men that no one asks their opinion about anything. Now what is your question?" "Are we lost?" asked Milo once again. Said the man, scratching his head. "I haven't had such a difficult question in as long as I can remember. Would you mind repeating it? It slipped my mind." Milo asked the question again. My, mumbled the man. "I know one thing's for certain. It's much harder to tell whether you are lost than whether you were lost, for, on many occasions, where you're going is exactly where you are. On the other hand, you often find that where you've been is not all where you should have gone, and since it's much more difficult to find your way back from some place you've never left, I suggest you go there immediately and then decide. If you have any more questions, please ask the giant." And he slammed his door and pulled down the shade. "I hope you're satisfied," said Alex when they returned from the house, and he bounced to his feet, bent down to awaken the snoring humbug, and started off, more slowly this time, in the direction of a large clearing. "Do many people live here in the forest?" asked Milo as they trotted along together. Oh yes, they live in a wonderful city called Reality, he announced, smashing into one of the smaller trees and sending a cascade of nuts and leaves to the ground. Ah, it's right this way. In a few more steps, the forest opened before them, and off to the left a magnificent metropolis appeared. The rooftops shone like mirrors. The wall... Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. That was a weak sneeze, but ugh. The rooftops shone like mirrors. The walls glistened with thousands of precious stones, and the broad avenues were paved in silver. Is that it? Shouted Milo, running towards the shining street. Oh no, that's only illusions, said Alec. The real city is over there. What are illusions? Milo asked, for it was the loveliest city he had ever seen. Illusions, explained Alec, are like mirages. And then, realizing that he didn't help much, he continued. And mirages are things that aren't really there, that you can see very clearly. How can you see something that isn't there? Yawned the humbug, who wasn't fully awake. Sometimes it's much simpler than seeing things that are, he said. For instance, if something is there, you can only see it with your eyes open, but if it isn't there, you can see it just as well with your eyes closed. That's why imaginary things are often easier to see than real ones. Then where is reality? Barked Talk. Right here, cried Alex, waving his arms. You're standing in the middle of Main Street. They looked around very carefully. Talk sniffed suspiciously at the wind, and the humbug gingerly stabbed his cane into the air, but there was nothing at all to see. It's really a very pleasant city, said Alec, as he strolled down the street, pointing out several of the sights which didn't seem to be there, and tipping his cap to a passerby. There were great crowds of people rushing along with their heads down, and they all appeared to know exactly where they were going, as they darted down and around the non-existent streets and in and out of the missing buildings. I don't see any city, said Milo very softly. Neither do they, Alec remarked sadly. But it hardly matters, for they don't miss it at all. It must be very difficult to live in a city you can't see, Milo insisted, jumping aside as a line of cars and trucks went by. Not at all, once you get used to it, said Alec. But let me tell you how it happened. And as they strolled along the bustling and busy avenue, he began. Many years ago, on this very spot, there was a beautiful city of fine houses Oh my god, excuse me, I yawned. Oh, thank you, Jack. I seem to be both yawning and sneezy today. Ugh. I don't know why. It's definitely I do still have allergies. They're the worst. They're the worst. Yeah. Okay. There was a beautiful city of fine houses and inviting spaces, and no one who lived here was ever in a hurry. The streets were full of wonderful things to see, and the people would often stop and look at them. Didn't they have any places to go? Asked Milo. To be sure, continued Alec. But as you know, the most important reason for going from one place to another is to see what's in between. And they took great pleasure in doing just that. Then one day someone discovered that if you walk as fast as possible and look at nothing but your shoes, you will arrive at your destination much more quickly. Soon everyone was doing it. They all rushed down the avenues and hurried along the boulevard, seeing nothing of the wonders and the beauty of their city as they went. Milo remembered the many times he had done the very same thing, and, as hard as he tried, there were even things on his own street that he couldn't remember. No one paid any attention to how things looked, and as they moved faster and faster, everything grew uglier and dirtier. As everything grew uglier and dirtier, they moved faster and faster, and at last a very strange thing began to happen. Because nobody cared, the city slowly began to disappear. Day by day, the buildings grew fainter and fainter, and the streets faded away, until at last it was entirely invisible. There was nothing to see at all. What did they do? The humbug inquired, suddenly taking an interest in things. Nothing at all, continued Alec. They went right on living here, just as they always had done. In the houses they could no longer see, and on the streets which had vanished, because nobody had noticed a thing. And that's the way they have lived to this very day. Hasn't anyone told them? Asked Milo. It doesn't do any good, Alec replies, for they can never see what they're in too much of a hurry to look for. Why don't they live in illusions? Suggested a humbug. It's much prettier. Many of them do, he answered, walking in the direction of the forest once again. But it's just as bad to live in a place where you do see it, where what you do see isn't there, as it is to live in one where you don't see it is, or what you don't see is. Perhaps someday you can have one city as easy to see as illusion and as hard to forget as reality, Milo remarked. That will happen only when you bring back rhyme and reason, said Alec, smiling, for he had seen right through Milo's plan. Now let's hurry or we'll miss the evening concert. They followed him quickly up a flight of steps which couldn't be seen, and through a door which didn't exist. In a moment they had left reality, which is sometimes a hard thing to tell, and stood in a completely different part of the forest. The sun was dropping slowly from sight, and the stripes of purple and orange and crimson and gold piled themselves on top of the distant hills. The last shafts of light waited patiently for a flight of wrens to find their way home, and take a group of ancient stars that had already taken their place. Here we are, cried Alex, and with a sweep of his arm he pointed towards an enormous symphony orchestra. Isn't it a grand sight? There are at least 1,000 musicians ranged in a great arc before them. To the left and to the right were violins and cellos, whose bows moved in great waves, and behind them in numberless profusions were the piccolos, flutes, clarinets, oboes, bassoons, horns, trumpets, trombones, and tubas, were all playing at once. At the very rear, so far away they could hardly be seen, were the percussion instruments, and lastly, in a long line up one side of the steep slope, were the solemn bass fiddles. On a high podium stood the conductor, a tall, gaunt man, with dark, deep-set eyes and a thin mouth placed carelessly between his long, pointed nose and his long, pointed chin. He used no baton, but conducted with large, sweeping movements which seemed to start at his toes and work slowly up through his body and along his slender arms and finally at the tips of his graceful fingers. I don't hear any music, said Milo. That's right, said Alex. You don't listen to this concert, you watch it. Now, pay attention. As the conductor waved his arms, he molded the air like handfuls of soft clay, and the musicians carefully followed his every direction. What are they playing? Asked Talk, looking up inquisitively at Alex. The sunset, of course. They play it every evening about this time. They do? Said Milo quizzically. Naturally, answered Alec, and they also play morning, noon, and night. When, of course, it's morning, noon, or night. Why, there wouldn't be any color in the world unless they played it. Each instrument plays a different one, he explained, and depending, of course, on what season it is and how the weather's to be, the conductor chooses his score and directs the day. But watch, the sun is almost set, and in a moment you can ask Chroma himself. The last colors slowly faded from the western sky, and, as they did, one by one the instruments stopped until only the bass fiddles, in their somber, slow movements, were left to play the night, and a single set of silver bells brightened the constellations. The conductor let his arms fall limply at his side, and stood quite still as the darkness claimed in the forest. That was a very beautiful sunset, said Milo, walking to the podium. It should be, was the reply. We've been practicing since the world began. And, reaching down, the speaker picked Milo up off the ground and set him on the music stand. I am Chroma the Great, he continued, gesturing broadly with his hands. Conductor of color, maestro of pigment, and director of the entire spectrum. Do you play all day long? Milo asked, when he had introduced himself. Ah, yes, all day, every day. He sang out, and pirouetted gracefully around the platform. I rest only at night, and even then they play on. Well, what happened if you stopped? Asked Milo, who didn't quite believe that color happened that way. See for yourself, roared Chroma, and he raised both his hands high over his head. Immediately the instruments that were playing stopped, and at once all color vanished. The world looked like an enormous coloring book that had never been used. Everything appeared in simple black outlines, and it looked as if someone with a set of paints the size of a house and a brush as wide as you can and a brush as wide could stay happily occupied for years. Then Chroma lowered his arms. The instruments began, and the color returned. "You see what a dull place the world would be without color," he said, bowing until his chin almost touched the ground. "But what pleasure to lead my violins in a serenade of spring green, or hear my trumpets blare out the blue seas, and then watch the oboes that tint it all in warm yellow sunshine. And rainbows are the best, and blazing neon signs, and taxicabs with stripes, and the soft muted tones of a foggy day. We play them all." As Chroma spoke, Milo sat with his eyes wide open, and Alec, Talk, and the humbug looked on in wonder. "Now, I really must get some sleep," Chroma yawned. We've had lightning, fireworks, and parades for the last few nights, and I've had to be up to conduct them, but tonight is sure to be quiet." Then, putting his large hand on Milo's shoulder, he said, "Be a good fellow and watch my orchestra till morning. Will you? And be sure to wake me at 5:23 for the sunrise. Good night, good night, good night." And with that he leapt from the podium and, in 3 long steps, vanished into the forest. "That's a good idea," said Talk, making himself comfortable in the grass as the bug grumbled himself quickly to sleep, and Alex stretched out in midair. And Milo, full of thoughts and questions, curled up on the pages of tomorrow's music and eagerly waited for the dawn. Chapter 11. Discord and Din. One by one, the hours passed, and at exactly 5:22, by Talk's very accurate clock, Milo carefully opened one eye, and, in a moment, the other. Everything was still purple, dark blue, and black, yet scarcely a minute remained to the long, quiet night. He stretched lazily, rubbing his eyelids, scratched his head, and shivered once as a greeting to the early morning mist. "I must wake Chroma for sunrise," he said softly. Then he suddenly wondered what it would be like to lead the orchestra and to color the whole world himself. The idea whirled through his thoughts until he quickly decided that since it couldn't be very difficult, and since they probably all knew what to do by themselves anyway, and since it did seem a shame to wake anyone so early, and since it might be his only chance to try, and since the musicians were already poised and ready, he would, but just for a little while. And so, as everyone slept peacefully on, Milo stood on his tiptoes, raised his arms slowly in front of him, and made the slightest movement possible with the index finger of his right hand. It was now 5:23 a.m. As if understanding his signal perfectly, a single piccolo played a single note, and off into the east a solitary shaft of cool lemon light flickered across the sky. Milo smiled happily, and then cautiously crooked his fingers again. This time 2 more piccolos and the flute joined in, and 3 more rays of light danced lightly into view. Then with both hands he made a great circular sweep in the air, and watched with delight as the musicians began to play all at once. The cellos made the hills glow red, and the leaves and grass were tipped with a soft pale green, as the violins began their song. Only the bass fiddlers rested as the entire orchestra washed the forest in color. Milo was overjoyed because they were all playing for him, and just the way they should. "Won't Chroma be surprised?" he thought, signaling the musicians to stop. "I'll wake him now." But instead of stopping, they continued to play even louder than before, until each color became more brilliant than he ever thought possible. Milo shielded his eyes with one hand and waved the other desperately, but the colors continued to grow brighter and brighter and brighter, until even a more curious thing began to happen. As Milo frantically conducted the sky and changed slowly from blue to tan and to a rich magenta red, flurries of light green snow began to fall, and the leaves on the trees and bushes turned a vivid orange. All the flowers suddenly appeared black, and the gray rocks became a lovely soft chartreuse, and even peacefully sleeping Talk changed from brown to a magnificent ultramarine. Nothing was the color it should have been, and yet, the more he tried to straighten things out, the worse it became. "I wish I hadn't started," he thought unhappily as a pale blue blackbird flew by. "There doesn't seem to be any way to stop them." He tried very hard to do everything the way Chroma had done, but nothing worked. The musicians played on, faster and faster. The purple sun raced quickly across the sky. In less than a minute it had set once more in the west, and then, without any pause, risen in the east. The sky was now quite yellow, and the grass a charming shade of lavender. 7 times the sun rose and almost as quickly disappeared as the colors kept changing. In just a few minutes a whole week had gone by. At last the exhausted Milo, afraid to call for help and on the verge of tears, dropped his hands to his side. The orchestra stopped. The colors disappeared, and once again it was night. The time was 5:27 a.m. "Wake up, everybody! It's time for sunrise," he shouted with relief, and quickly jumped from the music stand. "What a marvelous rest," said Chroma, striding up to the podium. "I felt as though I slept for a week. My, I see we're a little late this morning. I'll have to cut my lunch hour short by 4 minutes." He tapped for attention, and this time the dawn proceeded perfectly. "You did a fine job," he said, patting Milo on the head. "Someday I'll let you conduct the orchestra yourself." Talk wagged his tail proudly, but Milo didn't say a word, and to this day no one knows of the lost week, but the few people who happened to be awake at 5:23 on that very strange morning. "We'd better be getting along," said Talk, whose alarm had begun to ring again, "for there's still a long way to go." Chroma nodded a fond goodbye as they all started back to the forest, and in honor of the visit he made all the wildflowers bloom in a breathtaking display. "I'm sorry you can't stay longer," said Alex sadly. "There's so much more to see in the Forest of Sight, but I suppose there's a lot to see everywhere, if only you keep your eyes open." They walked for a while, all silent in their thoughts, until they reached the car, and Alex drew a fine telescope from his shirt and handed it to Milo. "Carry this with you on your journey," he said softly, "for there is much worth noticing that often escapes the eye. Through it you can see everything from the tender moss in the sidewalk crack to the glow of the farthest star. And most important of all, you can see things as they really are, and not just as they seem to be. It's my gift to you." Milo placed the telescope carefully in the glove compartment and reached up to shake Alex by the hand. Then as he stepped on the starter and, in his head full of strange new thoughts, drove out the far end of the forest. The easy rolling countryside now stretched before them in a series of dips and rises that leapt up one side of each crest and slid gently down the other in a way that made stomachs laugh and faces frown. As they topped the brow of the highest hill, a deep valley appeared ahead. The road, finally making up its mind, plummeted down, as if anxious to renew acquaintance with the sparkling blue stream that flowed below. When they reached the floor of the valley, the wind grew stronger as it funneled through the rocks, and directly ahead a bright-colored speck grew larger and larger. "It looks like a wagon," cried Milo excitedly. "It is a wagon! A carnival wagon," seconded Talk. And that's exactly what it was. Parked at the side of the road, painted bright red and looking quite deserted. On the other side, in enormous white letters, bordered in black, was an inscription. Cacophones et Discord. And below, in slightly smaller black letters, bordered in white, was Doctor of Dissonance. Doctor of Dissonance. "Perhaps if someone's at home, it might tell us how far we have to go," said Milo, parking next to the wagon. He tiptoed timidly up the 3 wooden steps to the door, tapped lightly, and leapt back in fright, for the moment he knocked there was a terrible crash from inside the wagon that sounded as if a whole set of dishes had been dropped from the ceiling onto the hard stone floor. At the same time the door flew open, and from the dark interior a hoarse voice inquired, Have you ever heard a whole set of dishes dropped from the ceiling onto a hard stone floor?" Milo, who had tumbled back off the steps, sat up quickly, while Talk and the humbug rushed from the car to see what had happened. "Well, have you?" insisted the voice, which was so raspy that it made you want to clear your own throat. "Not until just now," replied Milo, getting to his feet. "Ah, I thought not," said the voice happily. "Have you ever heard an ant wear fur slippers walk across a thick wooden wool carpet?" And before they could answer, he went on in a strange, croaking way. "Well, don't just stand there in the cold. Come in, come in. It's lucky you happened by. None of you looks well." A faint glow of a ceiling lamp dimly illuminated the wagon as they cautiously stepped inside. Talk first, eager to defend against all dangers. Milo next, frightened but curious. and the humbug laughed, ready at any moment to run for his life. "That's right. Now let's have a look at you," he said. Very bad, a serious case." The dusty wagon was lined with shelves full of curious boxes and jars of a kind found in old apothecary shops. It looked as though it hadn't been swept out in years. Bits and pieces of equipment lay strewn all over the floor, and to the very rear was a heavy wooden table covered with books, bottles, and bric-a-brac. "Have you ever heard of a blindfolded octopus unwrap a cellophane-covered bathtub?" he inquired again, as the air was filled with a loud, crickling, snapping sound. Sitting at the table, busily mixing and measuring, was the man who had invited them in. He was wearing a long white coat with a stethoscope around his neck and a small round mirror attached to his forehead, and the only really noticeable thing about him was his tiny mustache and his enormous ears, each of which was fully as large as his head. "Are you a doctor?" asked Milo, trying to feel as well as possible. "I am Cacophonius A. Discord, Doctor of Dissonance," roared the man, and as he spoke, several small explosions and a grinding crash were heard. What does the A stand for?" stammered the nervous bug, too frightened to move. "As loud as possible!" bellowed the doctor, and 2 screeches and a bump accompanied his response. "Now, step a little closer and stick out your tongues." "Just as I suspected," he continued, opening a large, dusty book and thumbing through the pages. "You're suffering from a severe lack of noise." He began to jump around the wagon, snatching bottles from the shelves until he had a large assortment in various colors and sizes collected at one end of the table. They were all neatly labeled: loud cries, soft cries, bangs, bongs, smashes, crashes, swishes, swooshes, snaps, and crackles, whistles and gongs, squeaks, squawks, and miscellaneous uproar. After pouring a little of each in a large glass beaker, he stirred the mixture thoroughly with a wooden spoon, watching intently as it smoked and steamed and boiled and bubbled. "Be ready in just a moment," he explained, rubbing his hands. Milo had never seen such unpleasant-looking medicine, and wasn't at all anxious to try any. "Just what kind of a doctor are you?" he asked suspiciously. "Well, you might say I'm a specialist," said the doctor. "I specialize in noise. All kinds, from the loudest to the softest, and from the slightly annoying to the terribly unpleasant. For instance, have you ever heard of a square-wheeled steamroller ride over a street full of hard-boiled eggs?" he asked, and as he did, all that could be heard were loud crunching sounds. "But who would want all those terrible noises?" asked Milo, holding his ears. "Everybody does," said the surprised doctor. "They're very popular today. Why, I'm kept so busy I can hardly fill the orders for noise pills, racket lotion, clamor salve, and hubbub tonic. That's all people seem to want these days." He stirred the beaker of liquid a few more times and then, as the scene cleared, continued. "Business wasn't always so good. Years ago, everyone wanted pleasant sounds, and, except for a few orders during wars and earthquakes, things were very bad. But then the big cities were built, and there were great needs for honking horns, screeching trains, clanging bells, deafening shouts, piercing shrieks, gurgling drains, and all that rest of those wonderfully unpleasant sounds that we use so much of today. Without them, people would be very unhappy, so I make sure that they get as much as they want. Why, if you take a little of my medicine every day, you'll never hear a beautiful sound again. Here, try some." "If it's all the same to you, I'd rather not," said the humbug, backing away to the far corner of the wagon. "I don't want to be cured of beautiful sounds," insisted Milo. "Besides," growled Talk, who decided he didn't much like Dr. Discord, "there is no such illness as lack of noise." "Of course not," replied the doctor, pouring himself a small glass of the liquid. "That's what only makes it so difficult to cure. I only treat illnesses that don't exist. That way, if I can't cure them, there's no harm done. Just one of the precautions of the trade," he concluded, and seeing that no one was about to take his medicine, he again reached towards the shelf, removed the dark amber bottle, dusted it carefully, and placed it on the table in front of him. "Very well. If you want to go through life suffering from a noise deficiency, I'll give it all to the din for his lunch," he said, and he uncorked the bottle with a hollow-sounding pop. For a moment everything was quiet as Milo, Talk, and the humbug looked intently at the bottle, wondering what Dr. Discord would do next. Then, faintly at first, they heard a low rumbling that sounded miles away. It grew louder and louder and louder, and closer and closer and closer, until it became a deafening, ear-splitting roar that seemed to be coming from inside the tiny bottle. Then, from the bottle, a thick bluish smog spiraled to the ceiling, spread out, and gradually assumed the shape of a thick bluish smog with hands, feet, bright yellow eyes, and a large frowning mouth. As soon as the smog had gotten completely out of the bottle, it grasped the beaker of liquid, tilted back what would have been its head, and if it really had one, and drank it all in 3 gulps. "Ah, that was good, master," he bellowed, shaking the whole wagon. "I thought you'd never let me out. Terribly cramped in there." This is my assistant, the awful Din," said Dr. Discord. "You must really forgive his appearance, for he really doesn't have any. You see, he is an orphan whom I raised myself, well, without the benefit of a governess or any other assistant for—" "No nurse is good nurse," interrupted the Din, doubling up with laughter. If you can imagine that thick bluish smog doubling up with laughter. "For I found him," continued the doctor, ignoring this outburst, "living alone and unwanted in an abandoned soda bottle, without family or relatives." "No niece is good niece," roared the Din again, with a laugh that sounded like several sirens going off all at once, and he slapped at where his niece should have been. "And brought him here," continued the exasperated Discord, "where despite his lack of shape or features, I trained—" "No nose is good nose," thundered the Din, once again as he collapsed in another fit of hysterics and clutched at his sides. "I trained him to be my assistant in the business of concocting and dispensing noise," finished the doctor, mopping up his brow with a handkerchief. "No noise is good noise," exclaimed the humbug. "Oh, no noise is good noise," exclaimed the humbug, happily trying to catch the spirit of things. "That not funny at all," sobbed the Din, who went to a corner and sulked. "What is a Din?" asked Milo, when he had recovered from the shock of seeing him appear. "You mean you never met the awful Din before?" said Dr. Discord with a surprised tone. "Why, I thought everyone had. When you're playing in your room and making a great amount of noise, what do they tell you? What do they tell you to stop?" "That awful Din," admitted Milo. "When the neighbors are playing with the radio too loud late at night, do you wish that they turn it down? What do you wish they turned down?" "That awful Din," answered Talk. "When the street on your block is being repaired and the pneumatic drills are working all day, what does everyone complain of?" "The dreadful row," volunteered the humbug. "The dreadful row," cried the anguished Din, "was my grandfather. He perished in the great silence epidemic of 1712. Milo felt so sorry for the unhappy Din that he gave him his handkerchief, which was immediately covered in bluish smoky tears. "Thank you," grunted Din. "That's very kind, but I certainly can't understand why you don't like noise," he said. "Why, I heard an explosion last week that was so lovely I cried for 2 days." The very thought of it upset him so much that he began to sob all over again, in a way that sounded almost exactly like a handful of fingernails being scratched across the mile-long blackboard. He buried his head into the doctor's lap. "He's very sensitive, isn't he?" asked Milo, trying to comfort the emotional Din. "It's true," agreed the Dr. Discord. "But he's right, you know, for noise is the most valuable thing in the world." "King of Ass says words are," said Milo. "Nonsense!" the doctor roared. "Why, when a baby wants food, how does he ask?" "He screams," answered the Din, looking up unhappily. "And when an automobile wants gas, it chokes," he shouted again, jumping for joy. "When a river wants water, what does it do?" "It creaks," bellowed the Din, as he collapsed into a fit of uncontrolled laughter. "And what happens when a new day begins?" "It breaks," he gasped joyfully from the floor, a look of utter bliss covering his face. "You see how simple it is?" the doctor said to Milo, who didn't see at all. And then, turning to the tear-stained, smiling Din, he remarked, Isn't it time for you to go?" "Where to?" asked Milo. "Perhaps we're going the same way." "I think not," the Din replied, picking up an armful of empty sacks from the table, "for I'm going on my noise collection rounds. You see, once a day I travel throughout the kingdom and collect all the wonderfully horrible and beautifully unpleasant noises that have been made, pack them into my sacks, and bring them back here for the doctor to make his medicines from. And he does a good job he does, said the Dr. Discord, pounding his fist on the table. So wherever the noise is, that's where you'll find me, said the Din, with an appreciative smile. And I must hurry along, for I understand that today there will be a screech, several loud crashes, and a bit of pandemonium. And in which direction will you be going? Asked the doctor, mixing another brew. To Digitopolis. To Digitopolis, replied Milo. How unfortunate, he said as the Din shuffled towards the door. How very unfortunate. Then you must pass through the Valley of Sound. Is it that bad? Asked the perpetually worried humbug. The Din paused at the doorway with a look of extreme horror on his almost featureless face, and the doctor shuddered in a way that sounded very much like a fast-moving freight train being derailed into a mountain of custard. Well, you might ask, for you will find out soon enough, was all he would say as he bade them farewell, and the Din galloped off onto his rounds. I need another swig of water. Getting thirsty. Doing the doctor's voice being all raspy and gravelly was kind of hard on my throat. Let's see. 12. The Silent Valley. How agreeable and pleasant this valley is, thought Milo, as once again they bounced along the highway, with the old humbug humming snatches of an old song, to his own vast amusement, and Tok sniffing contentedly at the wind. I really can't see what Dr. Discord was so concerned about. There certainly couldn't be anything unpleasant along this road. And just as the thought crossed his mind, they passed through a heavy stone gateway and everything was very different. At first it was difficult to tell what had just changed. It all looked the same and it all smelled the same. But for some reason, nothing sounded the same. I wonder what's happened, said Milo. At least that's what he tried to say, for although his lips moved, no sound came from his mouth. And suddenly he realized what it was, for Tok was no longer ticking, and the humbug, although happily singing, was doing so in complete silence. The wind was no longer rustled the leaves, the car no longer squeaked, and the insects no longer buzzed in the field. Not the slightest thing could be heard, and it felt as if in some mysterious way a switch had been thrown and all the sounds in the world had been turned off at the same instant. The humbug, suddenly realized what had happened, leapt to his feet in terror, and Tok worriedly checked to see if he was still keeping time. It was certainly a strange feeling to know that no matter how loudly or how softly he chattered, or rattled or bumped, it all came out the same way, as nothing. How dreadful, thought Milo as he slowed down the car. The three of them began to talk and shout at once with absolutely no result, until hardly noticing where they were going, they had driven into the midst of a large crowd of people marching along the road. Some of them were singing at the tops of their non-existent voices, and the others were carrying large signs which proclaimed, "Down with silence! All quiet is no diet. It's laudable to be audible. More sounds for all." And one enormous banner stated simply, "Hear, hear." Except for these, and the big brass cannons being pulled along behind, they all looked very much like the residents... They all looked very much like the residents of any other small valley to which you've never been. When the car had stopped, one of them held up a placard which said, "Welcome to the Valley of Sound," and the others cheered as loudly as possible, which was not very loud at all. "Have you come to help us?" asked another, stepping forward with his question. "Please," added a third. Milo tried desperately to say who he was and where he was going, but to no avail. As he did, 4 more placards announced, "Listen," crossed out, "look carefully, and we will tell you of our terrible misfortune." And while 2 of them held up a large blackboard, a third, running as fast as he could, explained why there was nothing but quiet in the Valley of Sound. At a place in the valley not far from here, he began, where the echoes used to gather and the winds came to rest, there is a great stone fortress, and in it lives the Soundkeeper, who rules this land. When the old King of Wisdom drove the demons into the distant mountains, he appointed her guardian of all sounds and noises, past, present, and future. For years she ruled as a wise and beloved monarch, each morning at sunrise releasing the day's new sounds to be born by the winds throughout the kingdom, and each night at the moonset gathering in the old sounds to be catalogued and filed in the vast storage vaults below. The writer paused for a moment to mop his brow, and then, since the blackboard was full, erased it completely and continued anew from the top. She was generous to a fault and provided us with all sound we could possibly use, for singing as we worked, for bubbling pots of stew, for the chop of an axe and the crash of a tree, for the creak of a hinge and the hoot of an owl, for the squish of a shoe in the mud and the friendly tapping of rain on the roof, and for the sweet music of pipes and the sharp snap of winter ice cracking on the ground. He paused again as a tear of longing rolled from his cheek to the lip from cheek to lip with the sweet salty taste of an old memory. And all these sounds, when once used, will be carefully placed in alphabetical order and neatly kept for the future reference. Everyone lived in peace, and the valley flourished as a happy home of sound. But then things began to change. Slowly at first, and then in a rush, more people came to settle here and brought with them new ways and new sounds, some very beautiful and some less so. But everyone was so busy with things that had to be done that they scarcely had time to listen at all. And as you know, a sound which is not heard disappears forever and is not to be found again. People laughed less and grumbled more, sang less and shouted more, and the sounds they made grew louder and uglier. It became difficult to hear even the birds in the breeze, and soon everyone stopped listening for them. He cleared the blackboard, as the humbug choked back a sob, and continued writing. The Soundkeeper grew worried and disconsolate. Each day there were fewer sounds to be collected, and most of those were hardly worth keeping. Many people thought it was the weather, and others blamed the moon, but the general consensus of opinion held that the trouble began at the time that rhyme and reason were banished. But no matter what the cause, no one knew what to do. Then one day Dr. Giftcourt appeared in the valley with his wagon of medicine and the bluish smoggy din. He made a thorough examination and promised to cure everyone of everything, and the Soundkeeper let him try. He gave several bad-tasting spoonfuls of medicine to every adult and child, and it worked, but not really as expected, for he cured everybody of everything but noise. The Soundkeeper became furious. She chased him from the valley forever and then issued the following decree. From this day forward, the Valley of Sound shall be silent. Since sound is no longer appreciated, I hereby abolish it. Please return all unused amounts to the fortress immediately. And that's the way it has been ever since, he concluded sadly. There is nothing we can do to change it, and each day new hardships are reported. A small man with his arms full of letters and messages pushed through the crowd and offered them to Milo. Milo took one which read, Dear Soundkeeper, we had a thunderstorm last week and the thunder still hasn't arrived. How long should we wait? Yours truly, a friend. Then he took a telegram which stated, Band concert, great success. Stop. When may we expect the music? Stop. Now you see, continued the writer, well, you must help us attack the fortress and free sound. What can I do? Wrote Milo. You must visit the Soundkeeper and bring from the fortress one sound, no matter how small, with which to load our cannon. For if we can reach the walls with the slightest noise, they will collapse and free the rest. It wouldn't be easy, for she is hard to deceive, but you must try. So Milo thought for just a moment, and then, with a resolute, I shall, volunteered to go. Within a few minutes he stood bravely at the fortress. Knock, knock, he wrote neatly on a piece of paper which he pushed under the crack. In a moment the great portal swung open, and, as it closed behind him, a gentle voice sang out, Right this way. I'm in the parlor. Can I talk now? Cried Milo happily, hearing his voice once again. Yes, but only in here, she replied softly. Now do come into the parlor. Milo walked slowly down the long hallway and into the little room where the Soundkeeper sat, listening intently to an enormous radio set, whose switches, dials, knobs, meters, and speakers covered one whole wall, and which at the moment was playing nothing. Isn't it lovely? She sighed. It's my favorite program. 15 minutes of silence, and then after that is a half-hour quiet, and then an interlude of lull. Why, did you know that there are almost as many kinds of stillness as there are sounds? But sadly enough, no one pays attention to them these days. Have you heard the wonderful silence just before the dawn? She inquired. Or the quiet and calm as just as the storm ends? Or perhaps you know the silence when you haven't the answer to a question you've been asked, or the hush of a country road at night, or the expectant pause of a room full of people when someone is just about to speak, or, most beautiful of all, the moment after the door closes and you're all alone in the whole house. Each one is different, you know, and all very beautiful, if you listen carefully. As she spoke, the thousands of little bells and chimes which covered her from head to toe tinkled softly, and, as if in reply, the telephone began to ring too. For someone who loves silence, she certainly talks a great deal, thought Milo. At one time I was able to listen to any sound made at any place at any time, the soundkeeper remarked, pointing towards the radio wall. But now I merely... Pardon me, interrupted Milo, as the phone continued to ring. But aren't you going to answer that? Oh no, not in the middle of a program, she replied, turned the silence up a little louder. But it may be important, insisted Milo. Not at all, she assured him. It's only me. It gets so lonely around here with no sounds to distribute or collect that I call myself 7 or 8 times a day just to see how I am. How are you? He asked politely. Not very well, I'm afraid. I seem to have a touch of static, she complained. But what brings you here? Oh, of course. You've come to tour the vaults. Well, they're usually open to the public only on Mondays from 2 to 4. But since you've traveled so far, we'll have to make an exception. Follow me, please. She quickly balanced to her feet with a chorus of jingles and chimes and started down the hallway. Don't you just love jingles and chimes? I do, she answered quickly. Besides, they're very convenient, for I'm always getting lost in this big fortress, and all I have to do is listen for them and I know exactly where I am. They entered a tiny cage-like elevator and traveled down for fully 3/4 of a minute, stopping finally in an immense vault, whose long lines of file drawers and storage bins stretched in all directions from where here began to where there ended, and from floor to ceiling. Every sound that's ever been made in history is kept here, said the soundkeeper, skipping down one of the corridors with Milo in hand. For instance, look here. She opened one of the drawers and pulled out a small brown envelope. This is the exact tune George Washington whistled when he crossed the Delaware on that icy night in 1777. Milo peered into the envelope and, sure enough, that's exactly what was in it. But why do you collect them all? He asked as she closed the drawer. If we didn't collect them, said the soundkeeper as they continued to stroll to the vault, they would be full of old sounds and noises, bouncing around and bumping into things. It would be terribly confusing, because you never know whether you were listening to an old one or a new one. Besides, I do like to collect things, and there are more sounds than almost anything else. Why, I have everything here from a buzz of a mosquito from 1,000,000 years ago to what your mother said to you this morning. And if you come back here in 2 days, I'll tell you what she said tomorrow. It's really very simple. Let me show you. Say a word. Any word. Hello, said Milo, but that was all he could think of. Now where do you think it went? She asked with a smile. I don't know, said Milo, shrugging his shoulders. I always thought that most people do, she hummed, peering down one of the corridors. Now, let me see. First we find the cabinet with today's sounds. Ah, here it is. And then we look under G for greetings, and then under M for Milo. And here it is, already in this envelope. So you see, the whole system is quite automatic. It's a shame we hardly use it anymore. That's wonderful, gasped Milo. May I have one little sound as a souvenir? Certainly, she said with pride, and then, immediately thinking better of it, added, not. And try not to take one, because it's strictly against the rules. Milo was crestfallen. He had no idea how to steal a sound, even the smallest one, from the soundkeeper had always had at least one eye carefully focused on him. Now for a look at the workshop, she cried, whisking him through another door into a large abandoned laboratory full of old pieces of equipment, all untended and rusting. "This is where we used to invent sounds," she said wistfully. "Do they have to be invented?" asked Milo, who seemed surprised almost at everything she told him. "I thought they just were." "No one realizes how much trouble we go through to make them," she complained. "Why, at one time this shop was crowded and busy from morning to night." "How do you invent a sound?" Milo inquired. "Oh, that's very easy," she said. "First you must decide exactly what the sound looks like, for each sound has its own exact shape and size. Then you must make some of them here in the shop, and grind each one 3 times into an invisible powder, and throw a little of each into the air every time you need it." "But I've never seen a sound," Milo insisted. "You never see them out there," she said, waving her arms in the general direction of everywhere, "except every once in a while on a very cold morning when they freeze. But in here we see them all the time. Here, let me show you." She picked up a padded stick and struck a nearby bass drum 6 times. 6 large, woolly, fluffy cotton balls, each about 2 feet across, rolled silently out onto the floor. "You see?" she said, putting some of them into a large grinder. "Now listen." And she took a pinch of the invisible powder and threw it into the air with a boom, 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 boom. "Do you know what a hand clap looks like?" Milo shook his head. "Try it," she commanded. He clapped his hands once, and a single sheet of clean white paper fluttered to the ground. He tried it 3 more times, and the 3 more sheets of paper did the very same thing. Then he applauded as fast as he could, and a great cascade of papers filled the air. "Isn't that simple? And it's the same for all sounds. If you think about it, you'll soon know what each one looks like. Take laughter, for instance," she said, laughing brightly, and 1,000 tiny bright-colored bubbles flew into the air and popped noiselessly. "Or speech," she continued. "Some of it's light and airy, some sharp and pointed, but most of it, I'm afraid, is just heavy and dull." "How about music?" asked Milo excitedly. "Right over here. We weave it on our looms. Symphonies are the large, beautiful carpets with all the rhythms and melodies woven in. Concertos are these tapestries, and all the other bolts of cloth are serenades, waltzes, overtures, and rhapsodies. We also have some songs that you often sing," she cried, holding up a handful of brightly colored handkerchiefs. She stopped for a moment and said, "We even had one section over there that did nothing but pull the sounds of the ocean to the seashells. This was once such a happy place." "And why don't you make sounds for everyone now?" he shouted, so eager that the soundkeeper leaped back in surprise. "Don't shout so, young man. If there's one thing we need more of around here, it's less noise. Now come with me and I'll tell you about it. And put that down immediately." Her last remark was directed towards Milo's effort to stuff one of the large drum beats into his back pocket. They returned quickly to the parlor, and when the soundkeeper had settled herself in the chair and carefully tuned the radio to a special hour of hush, Milo asked his question once again in a somewhat lower voice. "It doesn't make me happy to hold back the sounds," she began softly, "for if we listen to them carefully, they can sometimes tell us things far better than words." "But if that's so," asked Milo, and he had no doubt that it was, "shouldn't you release them?" "Never!" she cried. "They just use them to make horrible noises which are ugly to see and worse to hear. I leave all that to Dr. Discord and that awful, awful din." "But some noises are good sounds, aren't they?" he insisted. "That may be true," she replied stubbornly, "but if they won't make the sounds that I like, then I won't... Then they won't... That may be true," she replied stubbornly, "but if they won't make the sounds that I like, they won't make any." "But," he started to say, and it got no further than that, for he was about to say that he didn't think that was quite fair, a thought to which that obstinate soundkeeper might not have taken kindly. He suddenly discovered the way he would carry his little sound from the fortress. In the instant between saying the word and before it sailed off into the air, he had clamped his lips shut, and the butt was trapped in his mouth, all made but not spoken. "Well, I mustn't keep you all day," she said impatiently. "Now turn your pockets out so that I can see that you didn't steal anything and you could be on your way." When he had satisfied the soundkeeper, he nodded his farewell, for it would have been most impractical to say thank you or good afternoon, and raced out the door. Alright, you guys, we are halfway across the book. And I think I'm gonna leave it here for today. We can finish this our next stream because my throat is starting to get a little bit sore, a little bit raspy, and a little bit too dry for me to keep up with my hydration. So I'm gonna end it here. We'll start off next week at chapter 13. But thank you all so much for being here. I'm so glad that I can read this story to you. It's one of my childhood favorites, and I hope you guys really enjoy this. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. I'm so happy you guys could come, and I thank you guys so much. And as always, before I even say goodbye, I will let you guys know that tomorrow and Thursday I will not be streaming, so I'm gonna miss you guys so much until Friday. Friday will be our drawing stream, and yeah, I can't wait to see you guys there. I hope you guys take good care of yourselves this week. If you live on the East Coast, it's gonna be a bit on the hotter side with heat waves and stuff. So please take good care of yourselves. If you live in the southern hemisphere of the world, please keep warm and comfy and take good care of yourselves. And yeah, as always, you guys, I will be seeing you next time. Hug your friends, tell somebody you love them, and have a wonderful time. Be a force for good in the world. And yeah, I will be seeing you guys next time. Take good care of yourselves, okay? Bye!